What is up? Good mic work, back at you. Finally, time for another Q&A. It's been several months since I've been up here to do a Q&A. I believe the last one I did was my year-end commentary at the end of 2016, about 7 months ago. And I want to sincerely apologize for the long delay of getting this Q&A up. It is so hilarious that every single time I do one of these, it takes me so long to do it. I will advertise it way in advance. I'll make an announcement on one of my videos saying, hey, I'm ready to do another Q&A, so start sending me your email questions. And I feel like in my head that I can get it done pretty quick. But things come up, life is busy, my commentary schedule is busy, and things always get in the way. And I wanted to have this commentary up to you by June 15th, and here it is mid-July, and it's a full month late. So thank you so much to everyone for being patient. This was a pretty fun Q&A to do. I answered about 30 questions in this, and I do want to apologize also to anyone who did not get their question answered. I got about, 200-300 emails in this last chunk, and there was a lot to go through. And a lot of these questions I've had in the past. As you guys know, I've done many Q&As throughout the years. As a matter of fact, if you want to go back and look at some of those Q&As, there is a Q&A playlist on my YouTube channel, and if you want to click the cards in the top right-hand corner of the screen there, I'll have a drop-down menu with maybe like 4 or 5 of my most recent Q&As. So I got a lot of questions that I've gotten before in the past, and that I've talked about in the past, so if you didn't get your question answered, most likely, that's the reason. Of course, before we get started here, there are just a few things that I would like to mention. First of all, I want to welcome any first-time listeners or any new listeners. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not yet already. I've had some pretty decent channel growth in the past couple of months. I would like to keep that going. I do have a second channel that's been relatively dormant lately, although I'm trying to come up with ideas of things to do on there, so give that a sub. I have a website, goodmicworkcommentaries.com. I make announcements over there. All of these YouTube videos are available over there. And if you would like to listen to this commentary in podcast form, there is a downloadable MP3 of every single one of my commentaries. Also, you can find me on Stitcher Radio and iTunes. And speaking of Stitcher and iTunes, since I have you all here, and I know my most loyal fans are always tuning in to my Q&As, so if you don't mind, could you give me some feedback on Stitcher and iTunes? Go on there and leave me a review. I've got some decent reviews on iTunes, maybe a couple of dozen, but not very many on Stitcher. So if any of you do listen to me on either of those platforms, if you could go on there and give me a review and, give me a 5-star rating or whatever, it would just help my traffic over there. Maybe I can get noticed on those sites a little bit more as well. I've been on there for like 2 years now, and I have a decent amount of traffic, but for me, YouTube is my primary way of communicating with all of you guys. But I like having my commentaries available in podcast form, and I would like to appear in other feeds and get my channel some popularity on those other sites. So if any of you ever use iTunes or Stitcher Radio, please leave me a review or leave me a comment or leave me something that gets the channel some attention. I would consider it a huge favor. I'm also on social media. No Instagram account yet. A lot of you are telling me to get an Instagram account, but I don't know, I might. But for right now, I'm only on Facebook and Twitter. Give my Facebook page a like and follow me at Good Mic Work on Twitter. Twitter is where I am the most active. If you want to hear any of my opinions or if news breaks in the wrestling world and I have not yet come up to make a commentary about it, that's where you can probably find my opinions or where you can find me saying something about it. And I generally post up there several times a day. So please follow me on Twitter. That's very important if you want to be a fan of this channel. Other than that, there's not really much else to say. I'm not going to bore you with a 10-minute long intro. I know you guys have been waiting long enough for this Q&A to be uploaded. I'm not going to keep you waiting anymore. So I guess open up a beer, prop up your feet, lean back, and let's talk about some wrestling. So enjoy the Q&A. Here we go. Vibhav from Indore, India writes in, I've been watching the Monday Night Wars from 1996, and when Hall and Nash were going to jump ship to WCW in June, before that, their last pay-per-view was WWE In Your House, Good Friends, Better Enemies, and they were both booked very strongly. Kevin Nash had a title match with Shawn Michaels, and he was booked like a monster, power-bombing Shawn Michaels through a table, ripping the leg off of Mad Dog Vachon, and kicking Shawn's ass all over the place before he eventually lost, and Razor even put up a good, hard, long fight against Vader in his loss. So your question is, why did WWE not have booked Shawn and Vader to completely dominate Nash and Hall and punish them for signing with WCW, and what was the reason to book them strongly? Well, I think number one, it was pay-per-view, and plus those guys weren't done. They still had a whole string of house shows to do. And as a matter of fact, the curtain call was also a title match between Shawn and Diesel in a cage that was their final blow-off in Madison Square Garden, and you gotta sell tickets for that. So if you watch the previous pay-per-view, Let's say you're thinking about going to the Madison Square Garden show, and on In Your House, Shawn Michaels beats Diesel in 10 seconds. Why are you going to pay to watch that happen again? And plus, for your pay-per-view audience, you don't want to give them that shit match either. You know, you don't want to have just Shawn Michaels beating the hell out of Diesel for 20 minutes. It still has to be a competitive match. It still has to be believable. And in the end, these guys are going to lose anyway. And WWE, I mean, they could be vindictive sometimes. Sometimes they would bury somebody on their way out the door. But two guys like that, I also think WWE might have thought that they could return one day as well. So, hey, if they got to go over to WCW and make a bunch of money, maybe there's a time we can work together again in the future. And there's no reason to bury these characters. Plus, they were going to be going to WCW as Hall and Nash, not Razor and Diesel. So in WWE's mind, you know, that was a lot of money and time and investment that they put into those intellectual properties, and they didn't want to just bury them right on pay-per-view and piss off their audience and then affect house show sales for the next several weeks before these guys wrapped up business and headed off to WCW. And plus, there was no hard feelings, really. I'm sure Vince wasn't happy with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and I know both guys made an attempt to stick around in WWE, but at the end of the day, Vince McMahon, I don't think he really holds things too much against guys if they're just trying to do what's right for their family. Nash and Vince stayed friends after this. You know, Nash eventually came back to the WWE. He was in the inner circle. Sometimes he would even be attending WrestleMania parties before he even came back to the WWE as a guest of Vince McMahon. Those guys stayed cool together, and really, when it comes down to business, as long as you're not fucking over the company, as long as you're not doing what Lex Luger did, as long as you're not, you know, refusing to drop a belt or leaving in the middle of the night or just fucking over the company in some way, if you're offered a lot more money for half the dates, really at the end of the day, can Vince McMahon blame them? And I don't think that he did. I think it hurt Vince, and I think he had his feelings hurt, and it was really going to hurt the company. And it's a shame that they lost those guys, but really, they're just doing what was best for them. I mean, if Vince is making you work 300 days and WCW is going to make you work 160, and you're going to make 3 times as much money, I don't give a shit who you are, you're going to take that deal. So at the end of the day, provided that those guys never fucked over the company in any way, I don't think Vince was going to bury him. And he paid them everything. I heard stories that he had to send them their WrestleMania paychecks after they were already in WCW working in the NWO. That's when the payouts went out, and those guys got WrestleMania checks when they were on Nitro. And Vince paid him every single dime that he promised him. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think Vince is a businessman when it comes to guys like that. Even though them leaving the company definitely hurt, they left the right way. They gave their notice. They jobbed on the way out the door. And really, you couldn't punish them because there was no reason to. All they were doing was taking a better deal. And, you know, that's it takes a big man to be able to swallow that pride and let them go and not want to fuck them over and not want to talk shit about them. And plus, Nash and Hall had their biggest success in the WWE. Had they been able to stay there, they would have. If Vince would have paid them or compromised a little bit, you know, they would have stayed for sure. But Vince couldn't do that because nobody was making that kind of money. Nobody had guaranteed contracts back then. So if he did it for those two guys, he would essentially put himself out of business doing it for everybody else. And Vince and the WWE during that time in early 1996 could not afford that kind of money. Next one comes from Aditya or Aditya. God, I hope I'm saying that right. I am the worst name pronouncer on planet Earth, I feel like. You are from Seattle, and you prefaced your question with a lot of nice compliments. I sincerely appreciate that. And your question is, WWE goes all over the country doing its shows and pay-per-views, yet they rarely come to Seattle and Portland or the Pacific Northwest in general. We just had a SmackDown show here in Seattle last week, and the crowd was one of the best I've ever seen, especially the way they mark out for Daniel Bryan. This was the first WWE show here in over a year. Why is it the WWE doesn't do its pay-per-views in Seattle at all, while places like New York, Philly, Pittsburgh, Texas, Florida, etc. get multiple shows and multiple pay-per-views per year? Well, I think that's mostly just due to the travel and the surrounding areas and the surrounding cities. When WWE is doing their house show loops, you know, it usually all coincides in the same area as the next pay-per-view, or they at least start inching closer and closer to it, you know, and you can have a show, you can have a house show in Florida one night and then your pay-per-view in Atlanta. All these cities are very close together, especially flight time-wise. I mean, it doesn't take you hardly any time at all to fly anywhere on the East Coast. And a lot of these cities are much closer together. You know, you think about that part of the country, you do have Pittsburgh and Boston and New York and Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago and Charlotte and DC and Philly and Atlanta. And then you can go down to Orlando even, New Orleans. All of those cities are in really close proximity to each other. Where when you look at the U.S. map, it's not at all like that with cities like Seattle and Portland. I mean, yeah, you can go up and do Vancouver, and you can travel all the way down to California and do San Francisco, San Jose, LA, San Diego, Sacramento, places like that, but the surrounding states are empty. I mean, what else is in Oregon other than Portland? You know, you can't just drive to another city and run another show. Bordering Oregon is Idaho. Bordering Idaho is fucking Montana. Bordering Idaho and Montana is fucking Wyoming. Then Utah. There's just nothing there. These are wide open spaces with no cities. I know you can run Boise, you can run Salt Lake, you can even run fucking Minneapolis and shit like that when you start going a little bit further east. But really, these states in between, it's just not very good for travel. So I think anytime WWE does come to Seattle or Portland, it's got to be just for a pay-per-view or a Raw. They fly up there. You know, I would imagine when you do a Raw in Seattle, you should probably do SmackDown in Portland and then swing through and hit California before heading back east, maybe stopping in Arizona and Texas along the way. But the travel is just not good up there. And when you run a show in Philly, you can have a show the next night in Washington, D.C., and you're talking about a 2-hour drive or some shit like that. So it's not even that far. So it's just different travel-wise. I think up in the Pacific Northwest, and Seattle and Portland are great cities. I've been to both cities. I'm fascinated with Portland. Unfortunately, I'm a climate guy. I must live where it's warm. I lived on the beaches of North Carolina for 20 years, and now I'm living on the beaches of Southern California. I will not go any further north than this, but every time I visited Portland, I'm fascinated with the city. It's very much my speed. I feel like if it weren't for the weather, I could live there just because of all the like-minded people and how cool and quirky of a city it is. Seems like my kind of town. And I'm a huge fan of old-school Portland wrestling back when Donnovan was the promoter. I absolutely love that part of the country, but yeah, I think the reason they don't come there as often is because there's not enough surrounding cities to travel there all the time, where it's completely different on the East Coast. Next one comes from Rashad from Atlanta. You write in, hello, good mic work. My question is, although the 1994 King of the Ring is a great pay-per-view, what are your thoughts on Art Donovan's commentary from that show? Both Gorilla Monsoon and Macho Man seem distracted by him, and why have they never mentioned him again? Well, I know I've mentioned Art Donovan's legendary performance at the 1994 King of the Ring a few times in the past, although I will say I might have to disagree with the King of the Ring being a great pay-per-view. I don't really feel that year's show was that great. There was a lot of things going on in the WWE at that time, a lot of really, really bad things. Vince McMahon was right in the middle of the steroid trial. As a matter of fact, I think this is one of the only pay-per-views that he didn't even attend. Hulk Hogan literally just like days or weeks before this had signed with WCW, and he was about to go main event Bash at the Beach a month later against Ric Flair in a show that would outdraw the King of the Ring by a lot. And I don't think that this King of the Ring was as good as the year prior. I loved 93. There was so many good matches on that. The whole tournament was just beautifully done. This year it was a little bit different. I really enjoyed the Owen Hart 1-2-3 Kid match. And I also enjoyed the swerve with Jim the Anvil Neidhart when he showed up with Bret by his side, only to turn heel later in the night and join Owen Hart and help him win the King of the Ring. So that I liked. And the Bret Diesel match wasn't horrible. And there was a few things here or there on the show that was very good. Plus we saw the return of Rowdy Roddy Piper. But overall, I thought the show was very, very weak. And 1994 was a shit time in the WWE. So I might classify the pay-per-view as good, but not necessarily great. And I think part of the reason why we saw Art Donovan on TV was because back then in 1994, wrestling was in a decline. I mean, business was so down for everybody. WCW was about to make some waves by signing Hogan, but really overall, nobody gave a shit about pro wrestling. If you look at what was going on in the WWE at the time, the arenas that they're running, the towns that they're running, just look at the crowd on a 1994 episode of Raw. They are literally inside of a gymnasium with maybe 400 people in there. I mean, there's hardly any crowd at all. These were bad times for live attendance, for television ratings, for pay-per-view buys, for everything. And publicity wasn't that easy to come by for WWE back then unless it was negative. And all the publicity WWE was getting was negative because of Vince McMahon's steroid trial that was happening simultaneously with this year's King of the Ring. So, you know, they were always struggling to find anybody to come in to give the company a boost or give them some publicity or whatever. And King of the Ring was in Baltimore. And Art Donovan is a Baltimore Colts legend. So even though he didn't know shit about wrestling, he was somebody for WWE to bring out there and smear on TV just to give them some sort of an outside rub. And they were hard up for doing that back then. They would make the biggest deal about every little tiny celebrity, even like D-list celebrities. If they had anything to do with WWE, they would talk about it on Raw. They would be so proud of it. They'd print it in the magazines. Now it's like they can't keep the celebrities away. I mean, if you look at the way things are now in 2017, these fucking fuckers are on ESPN. Every time they have a WrestleMania, you've got Shaquille O'Neal, you've got Snoop Dogg, you've got fucking Donald Trump. You have every single celebrity you can possibly think of all wanting to be a part of the WWE, to where the WWE almost has too much of it. Back in 1994, they had hardly none of it. And that's another reason I think that less than a year later, we saw Lawrence Taylor main event WrestleMania 11, because WWE needed that mainstream publicity, and putting Lawrence Taylor in the ring was going to get a lot of coverage on sports networks and ESPN and shit like that. And, you know, a couple months later, they would go to Chicago and have Walter Payton involved in the Razor Ramon Diesel match at SummerSlam. That was actually very good and very well done. So WWE just seemed like, at the time, they had a rock-hard erection for getting any sort of publicity outside of the wrestling world at all, no matter who they had to put on television. And Art Donnovan was one of these situations where they threw him out there with absolutely no preparation at all. First of all, Donovan's an old man. And if you go back and watch, if you've never seen the 1994 King of the Ring, please go check it out and just listen to what Art Donnovan says. It's hard to even put this stuff into words. He is just a poor, clueless old man that doesn't know what the fuck's going on, doesn't know a thing about wrestling. He asks literally how much each and every guy weighs. Every time they're coming to the ring, how much does this guy weigh? He's basically like you just taking your grandpa and putting him behind a headset on Monday Night Raw, a guy who's never even watched wrestling before, and say, here you go, here's a headset on live pay-per-view, call this fucking match. You know, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to react to what he sees in there like a normal person would. And Art Donnovan kept questioning everything. If he saw a strange move, he's like, what did he do that for? A monkey flip or something? Why did he do that? And he just kept asking why people did things. It seemed like somebody would at least take 10 minutes backstage to explain to the guy what professional wrestling is, you know, what it's about, what your job is out there, help get these guys over, just talk a little bit. You don't have to go crazy or anything. You're brand new. You don't know anything about wrestling. So by all means, you know, say what you feel, but just think a little bit before you just say, how much does this guy weigh? How much does this guy weigh? It was one of the worst guest commentary spots ever. I mean, ever. I cannot, off the top of my head, think of anything worse than Art Donnovan. I'm sure there's been some, and we've had some shitty guest announcing appearances here or there, but nothing even comes close to poor Art Donnovan. So go check out 1994 King of the Ring. You will laugh your ass off. Back then, WWE would put publicity ahead of common sense, and that's one of those things that they should have thought about after they talked to the guy for a few minutes. They should have been like, we can't put this guy out there on commentary. If we want to do something with him, do a segment in the ring, do a backstage interview, parade him out there in front of the crowd to do something, or just to get a little bit of that rub. There was other ways, I think, to do or to utilize Art Donnovan at that show other than putting him on fucking commentary. So just poor overall decision-making all around by the WWE in that situation. It goes to show how different things were back in 1994. You would not... There's too many people today that would say, we can't do that. And looking back, it just seems so silly. I'm not even mad about this. The King of the Ring, I look back on with, like, lovable resentment. Yeah, it was a stupid show. Yeah, Art Donnovan was out there for no fucking reason whatsoever, but I still smile whenever I go back and watch this pay-per-view because we saw the King of Hearts win the King of the Ring, following in the footsteps of his brother. And it wasn't the worst King of the Ring we ever saw. The next year's would be much worse. 1995 was 10 times worse than 1994, and that's saying something. So, Art Donnovan, bless his heart, clueless old man that should have never been on commentary to begin with, but it does make for an interesting and entertaining topic years later in podcasts, that's for sure. Hyro from Pico Rivera, California. Hi, good mic work. I've been a huge fan of your YouTube channel for over a year now. My question is, why do you think WWE has always preferred Jeff Hardy over RVD? Both guys are two of my favorite wrestlers ever, but I noticed when Jeff failed his drug tests, Vince and the WWE never gave up on him and continued pushing him, while when RVD failed his first drug test, he got immediately depushed, forcing him to leave back in 2007. Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons for this. First of all, with WWE continuing to push Jeff Hardy, I was surprised that they gave him a title push or a title program so closely to his drug suspension. But with RVD, the one reason why he was depushed so much is because he was the champ. And to the best of my knowledge, Jeff Hardy didn't fail any drug tests when he was champ, did he not? I could be wrong about that. I don't think that he did. But Rob Van Dam and Sabu, of course, were pulled over and got in trouble while RVD was the WWE champion, and they had no choice but to take the belt off of him because they were going to suspend him, much like they had to do with Roman Reigns last year. So I think RVD's depush just came because he was champion. There's nowhere to go but down. With Jeff Hardy, he got suspended, but then when he was brought back, aside from being punished in other ways, he was pretty much right back on top because Jeff was a moneymaker. And that might be another reason. In the ring, I'm actually more entertained with Rob Van Dam. I think he's an overall better wrestler. I think he's a little bit more believable. He's a little bit bigger. Jeff Hardy does some insane moves, very innovative style, and so does RVD. But RVD he seems more controlled, because he's into that kind of martial arts and he can do the leg splits and all of that. He's very, very athletic. Not that Jeff is not athletic, but Rob Van Dam is a little smoother, looks like he knows what he's doing, where Jeff Hardy is just a crazy man flying all over the ring. So I think their styles are just a little bit different, and I think Rob Van Dam is the overall better worker in the ring, and he was going over Jeff Hardy in the beginning of their careers. When he came in with the ECW guys in 97, he worked with Jeff on Raw. Then years later, when they did the Invasion, they put the two of them on pay-per-view. Remember that ladder match at Invasion? That was a great match, but Rob Van Dam won that match. So I think there were times when WWE considered Rob Van Dam the better worker. However, Jeff Hardy is just more marketable. I mean, when you think about it, Rob Van Dam's got a great look too, but Jeff Hardy is a comic book character. He's very animated. He's got the different ring outfits. The kids love him. The adults love him because he can work. He's just incredibly over with every part of the audience. The kids are wearing his long armbands and the headbands and the shirts and all the Hardy Boys merchandise. He sells a ton of merchandise. When he's in the WWE, Rob Van Dam, he just had a shirt or two. Jeff Hardy you can make a whole bunch of shit for. And I just think overall Jeff Hardy is a more fun character, somebody that can be marketed better, sell a lot more merchandise, and WWE can just do more with the Jeff Hardy character. Rob Van Dam was pretty much the same throughout his entire career, never really changed his character much. We all know who Rob Van Dam is. He's an excellent worker with a laid-back attitude, and that's it. And, sometimes there's only so much you can do with a guy like that. So Rob Van Dam had his opportunities. Who knows, had he not gotten pulled over with Sabu, how long his WWE title run would have lasted. I would have liked to think it was going to go on for a while before eventually dropping into Edge maybe a few months later, but I was hoping he would have a nice long run with it. But him getting pulled over kind of derailed that. Rob Van Dam leaving really wasn't due to any drug issues because Rob Van Dam he's clean and sober compared to Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy has had all sorts of problems with all sorts of different kinds of drugs. Rob Van Dam is simply a pothead and nothing more. He is smoking a harmless drug that, aside from making you eat a few more Oreos or forgetting some things here or there, is relatively harmless, especially when you think of alcohol and tobacco and pills, pain prescription medicine and somas and all this other shit that Jeff Hardy was taking. He was on multiple drugs and he's been so fucked up for most of his life. I agree with you 100% that the logic doesn't make sense why he got opportunity after opportunity after opportunity and Rob Van Dam never got a crack at the WWE title again after getting popped with Sabu back in 2006. So from that aspect, you're 100% right. It absolutely makes no sense, but I think WWE can make more money off of Jeff Hardy than they could off of Rob Van Dam. And on top of that, Jeff Hardy is one of those guys that's loved wrestling his whole life. Rob Van Dam has always been the guy that he's out there and he'll work and he'll bust his ass and he appreciates wrestling and loves wrestling, but it is not his life. He does not need the WWE to be happy. He does not need TNA to be happy. He doesn't need to wrestle at all to be happy. He's the most laid-back, chill guy you would ever fucking meet, and he wrestles and he works on his terms and nobody else's. And, that can harm him in the long run, but it also probably makes him a much happier and much more mentally stable person to live your life that way. Jeff Hardy and Matt Hardy, we've all seen, they literally grew up in wrestling. They started wrestling in their backyard when they were 14. By the time Jeff was 16, he was on Monday Night Raw taking on Scott Hall. So they literally eat, breathe, and sleep wrestling, where Rob Van Dam, if he never had to wrestle again, he'd be just fine financially and everything else because he's been smart with his money and he's just a guy that's got his head screwed on straight. So I think Jeff Hardy in the long run was going to be more the company guy. He had been there longer. Like I said, there's differences in their marketing. Jeff is much easier to create merchandise for and things like that. So there's probably a lot of factors that go into it. But those would be the reasons, if I had to guess, why WWE is always preferred, as you say, Jeff Hardy over Rob Van Dam. Those are probably the reasons why. Next one comes from Ricky Sanchez from San Antonio, Texas. Ricky actually took a good mic work sign and got on camera at the NXT TakeOver show before the Royal Rumble. So thank you very much, Ricky, for doing that. You had a couple of Hall of Fame related questions for me. The first one was, in your opinion, who would be the best ECW original to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame first? Taz, Rob Van Dam, Sabu, or the Dudleys? I would probably say the Dudleys just because of what they accomplished in WWE. Being a top tag team there for many, many, many years, and then even coming back and doing a return run, and just being so decorated. I mean, they've won the tag belts in every promotion they've been in. They've even won more than the Legion of Doom and guys like that. And I think they are the most decorated tag team of the modern era. So for that reason, I'd probably have to say Dudleys, but a close second would be Rob Van Dam. I mean, he's former WWE champion, multi-time Intercontinental champion, one of the best workers we've ever seen. So I think it would have to come down to the Dudleys and RVD just because of their history in WWE. They've done more than the other guys. Taz only wrestled there for a year or two before he was behind the commentary booth, and then he was off to TNA and doing other shit. And Sabu, WWE has never really had that much respect for, I don't feel. So I would put Taz and Sabu at the bottom of that list. And another Hall of Fame question you have is who should go in first between Paul Heyman or Eric Bischoff, and who should induct them. I swear I have had this question asked to me before. As far as who goes in first, I don't know. Eric Bischoff definitely deserves it. I mean, I've really changed my tune on Eric Bischoff. Back in the day, during the Monday Night Wars, he was viewed as this scummy little fucker that was giving away Raw results and being so dirty and underhanded and trying to put the WWE out of business and all this stuff. But when you get to know him and you get to see him on WWE TV and you hear him in interviews and shoot interviews and whatnot, he's a very smart, down-to-earth type, very likable guy. And I have more than forgiven Eric Bischoff for anything that he did during the Monday Night Wars, and I've always been very intrigued by his career. I loved the DVD that the WWE put out on him, documenting his career and everything that he did in WCW. And he was the only guy to challenge Vince, the only guy to ever challenge Vince. The Crockett's never even came close, really, when you look at it. I mean, they were his biggest competitor, but there was never any fear of them overtaking the WWE because what WWE was doing was better than what the Crockett's were doing, especially from a production standpoint. So when Bischoff took over WCW, he was the first guy to go out there and start changing things, start making themselves a little bit more professional looking, trying to compete with the WWE, like actually compete, and then taking a bunch of money and throwing it at Hulk Hogan, at Scott Hall, at Kevin Nash, and creating the NWO, and putting Nitro live head-to-head with Raw for 2 hours, giving them an advantage over a taped show. They're giving away the results. They're taking their talent. I mean, Eric Bischoff was the only guy to ever do that to Vince. And plus, he wasn't stupid. I mean, yeah, WCW had a lot of problems. Yeah, it was horribly mismanaged, and it was a clusterfuck back there. But really, Eric Bischoff's got a good head on his shoulders and a working, functioning brain in his skull. And I have a lot of respect for Bischoff. I wish he would have had a bigger role in the WWE when they brought him in as a talent. I would have loved if they just would have thrown him on the creative team. He doesn't have to have any kind of power or any sort of control. Just let him be there to spitball ideas, bounce ideas off of, and just give his input. I think there's enough knowledge in Bischoff's brain, given his experience and some of the things that he's done and come up with in the past, that they should at least listen to what he has to say. Paul Heyman is the same way. Now, Paul Heyman, they actually gave that job to. He was a head writer of SmackDown for a brief time there, and Paul Heyman also deserves to go into the Hall of Fame. But as far as who deserves to go in first, with those two guys, I don't think it matters. To me, it's going to be just whenever the WWE can work it into their schedule or whenever they think the best time for them to go in is. Paul Heyman, with his association with Brock Lesnar and him probably remaining on WWE TV for the foreseeable future, you would think Bischoff would have to go in first because Bischoff is kind of out of the spotlight. He's not involved in WWE. He's just basically retired and doing a few things here or there. He's big in the podcast world right now, creating a website for, podcasters to go display their content since we've been running into all the YouTube problems and stuff. A few of you have told me to contact him and get in touch with him because he's put a few of my colleagues up on his site already. I think Joe Cronin has got a spot up there. So, he might be a guy that I should maybe contact in the future. And he's keeping himself busy, but he's just a very cool, likable, laid-back guy. And when I watched the documentary on him, it just made me remember what a major player he really was in the business. So I think Eric Bischoff most likely will go in first, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's because he deserves to go in first. I don't think it's about really going in first. It's just about timing of it. And Paul Heyman will eventually go in. He can go in as a manager and as a promoter. He can go in twice, essentially. Eric Bischoff, same thing. I mean, his WCW run and all the things he accomplished there was definitely Hall of Fame worthy, but also his career in WWE as an on-air talent, I feel, was also Hall of Fame worthy. I mean, how many guys have been GM for 3+ years or whatever it was? And he was such a good GM, too. He was such a great heel, and he had a lot of great moments during his time in WWE running Raw. And Eric Bischoff, if you ask me, should have already been in the WWE Hall of Fame. So hopefully he'll go in the next couple of years. Maybe even next year in New Orleans. I think it would be fun to see Eric go in. He definitely deserves it. It wouldn't be a good mic work Q&A without a Bret Hart question. Jay from London, England writes in, what are your top 5 favorite Bret Hart matches of all time? Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've talked until I've been blue in the face about Bret Hart. You guys know all of my favorite matches and moments from his career. I've talked about that literally for 7 years straight now. So I'm just going to give you the answer to this and maybe a few thoughts on each match, but that's it. In no particular order, I don't think I'm going to rank these. I'm just going to give you my 5. I don't know which one's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But of course, Owen Hart, WrestleMania 10, very top of the list. It's got to be 1 or number 2. I'd say that is number 1. Number 1A would probably be against Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 1991 when he won the Intercontinental title. A year before that, him and Jim Neidhart won the tag team belts by beating Demolition in a great 2 out of 3 falls match at SummerSlam 1990, one of my favorite SummerSlam matches of all time. And one that I haven't mentioned very often, and I actually want to review this pay-per-view, and it's probably going to be one of the next pay-per-view reviews that I do, and that is Survivor Series 1995, one of my favorite shows ever in the WWE. I thought it was a really good pay-per-view, and I loved the match between Bret Hart and Diesel. Their first 2 encounters weren't that great. I didn't really enjoy their match at King of the Ring 1994, and I didn't really enjoy their match at the Royal Rumble 1995 all that much either because both matches ended with no winner declared. So this time things were much different. The friendship was out the window. Back at the Royal Rumble, they tried to, there was the show of respect at the end. And this was like a no-holds-barred match. Bret was getting nasty. He was using steel chairs. He was tying up Diesel's feet. Bret Hart went through a table. It was one of the first table spots we had seen ever, really, in wrestling. ECW was doing it a little bit, but you didn't really see this stuff in the WWE. And then finally at the end with Bret playing possum and he suckers in Diesel and rolls him up in a small package and wins the WWE title for the 3rd time. I thought it was a great Bret Hart moment. And another match I'll throw out there is the awesome match he had on Raw back in 1994 with the 1-2-3 Kid. Very underrated match. Go check it out. It's on YouTube. It's on the network. It's on every Bret Hart DVD. It's everywhere. You will see some amazing stuff in that match. So those are probably my 5 favorite Bret Hart matches. But man, that's really narrowing it down. I would much rather pick 20 matches because if you noticed, I don't even have his match with Davey from SummerSlam 92 on that list. So I think I would much prefer to do a top 10 or something like that, but there you go. Those are my 5 favorite. Gabe from my old stomping ground of Wilmington, North Carolina. I used to live there on Wrightsville Beach for nearly 20 years. Say hi to the East Coast for me. I think Wilmington is an awesome little town, and I miss it dearly. You write in, do I remember the short-lived 7 gimmick that Goldust had in WCW in the late 90s? If so, what are my thoughts on the nature of the gimmick itself and when Dustin Rhodes pretty much tore apart the gimmick and WCW's talent department in an on-air supposed shoot promo? Yeah, I remember that. I thought it was awesome. The funny thing is that Dustin Rhodes has always been very angry at times in his career. This was a great promo. This was a legit pipe bomb. If you guys go on YouTube right now, look up Seven's debut in WCW. For those of you who might not have seen this or remember it, it's pretty cool because they did a whole series of vignettes leading up to to Dustin's debut as Seven, and they were, I forgot how it went, but it was like a vision of him in a window looking at a little kid or something creepy like that. His face is painted completely white. He looks like Uncle Fester. He's wearing an Undertaker-type outfit with a long trench coat and a hat. And they built this thing up. And you thought to yourself, wow, WCW got their hands on Dustin Rhodes. He was Goldust in the WWE. They're going to bring him in a similar character, maybe just a little bit darker in WCW. And he's come home because WCW is, where he really made his name and wrestled as the Natural back in the early 90s and was really good. And he debuts finally on Nitro, I think. It might have been Thunder. I forgot. But he comes out there and immediately gets on the mic and says, look at this shit that they have me in, and starts cutting a promo on, I guess, the powers that be, because around this time is when Russo and Ferrara went over there, and they were doing that whole angle where the powers that be and the writers and, basically exposing the business even more than it was already exposed by that point. And he basically says this gimmick is shit. I came back to WCW because I thought it was home, and they dressed me up in this nonsense. And he said Goldust was a terrible character. He shit all over Goldust. And the funny thing is he kind of did this in the WWE in 98. If you remember, it was one of those Monday Night Raw shows, and I remember him coming out to the stage as Dustin and burning the Goldust costume in a barrel, saying this gimmick is ruining my life and Goldust is dead as of now. And they dropped the whole thing only to bring it back like 6-7 months later. So essentially he's doing the same thing now in WCW, shitting all over his previous gimmick of Goldust. a gimmick that you look at today in 2017 is a pretty iconic and industry-changing character. From the time he came in and all the controversy surrounding him in 1995 to see him still relevant, or still on TV at least, in 2017 and what is seemingly probably his final run, and seeing what a great career and what a legacy the Goldust character had. It's kind of funny to watch him back then shit all over it. But I do remember it. I don't think it was a legit shoot promo. I think it was totally planned. It was the type of shit that Russo liked to do back then, and I actually did like the promo. I thought the promo was good. And I'm glad the 7 gimmick didn't last. I don't even really remember what Goldust or what Dustin did in WCW after that. I know he had to reconcile with his father. Him and Dusty didn't talk for like 5 years during his entire time in WWE. So I don't think they got back together until he returned to WCW around this time. But, you know, I thought the entrance and the debut of 7 only for Dustin to say, fuck this, I'm not going to be this character, I actually thought it was kind of good. Next one comes from a very special fan, Christian Sanchez, one of my best listeners and biggest supporters. Christian is generally represented by his father, Joey, who writes in asking questions on Christian's behalf, and I always make it a point to answer his question, or one of his questions at least, in every Q&A that I do. I was informed that unfortunately Justin Sanchez, who is Christian's younger brother, passed away unexpectedly while he was attending UCLA. Very young kid, passed away unexpectedly of an acute pancreatitis, and this took place about 2 months ago. Christian and Justin were very big wrestling fans. They used to play with their toys together as kids, and they watched all the pay-per-views together. And this is a very sad thing to hear, especially knowing what a big supporter of the channel that all of you are. So my heartfelt condolences go out to Christian and his dad over the loss of their brother and son. And please know you have my support and my deepest sympathy. And it's a shame that such a young, hardworking student passed away so unexpectedly and at such a young age. So my heart goes out to you. He still wants his question answered. So, of course I will, Christian. You sent me a couple of them. And the first one was, what are my thoughts on WCW commentator Mike Tenay? I love Mike Tenay. Mike's awesome. I would have loved to see him come in to the WWE back in the day. At the time of WCW's buyout, I don't think there was really room for him. I mean, they had a commentary team that was solid on Raw and SmackDown, and I guess there just wasn't a place for Mike Tenay. I would have liked to see him come in later and maybe announce some ECW or NXT or whatever, but he spent most of his time in TNA. And he's not perfect. He's not my favorite commentator or anything, but I always respected him because he was an educated wrestling announcer who knew guys' history and knew holds and knew how to actually call a match, much like Jim Ross. I think the two of them are two of the best, modern commentators that we've had. And when you think of guys that actually call the matches, Mike Tenay is on that list of a Jim Ross, of a Gordon Soley, of a Mauro Ranallo. You can throw Mike Tenay in there as well. I have a ton of respect for him, and I thought it would have been awesome if he ever came into the WWE, but unfortunately we never have seen it as of 2017. Your other question is an internet story, or not an internet story, but it's a story that's been told a few times on shoot interviews and stuff, and that is apparently back at Survivor Series 1991 when The Undertaker beat Hogan for the title. Hogan went back to the locker room and really sold the injury. He sold it forever in the ring. Of course, he was pile-driven or tombstoned on the steel chair during the finish of the match. But as you go back and watch the tape, Hogan's neck was and head was about a foot away from the chair. He didn't even come close to making contact with the chair at all. And apparently he kind of really oversold it backstage and pretended to get a concussion and might have even passed out or fell down. And apparently it really rattled The Undertaker. He felt horrible. He thought he was going to be in a lot of trouble for hurting, a guy like Hogan, the face of this company. And he takes the belt off of him while botching the finish. And apparently he was really freaked out. And then the story goes, you come to find out that Hogan wasn't even hurt at all and he was faking the whole thing. I don't know how true that was. I mean, if Hogan did that, he had to know that his head didn't come anywhere close to the chair. So if he's going to fake an injury, as soon as they see the tape, they're going to realize that he's full of shit. So why would Hogan do that? Would he really be that stupid? But a few people have told this story before. I don't know. I can't really answer whether or not it's legit or not. But if it is legit, and this is a little game that Hogan tried to play, a little political game with The Undertaker because he was, pissy about having to drop the belt to him or whatever, I don't know what his motivation for that would have been. But it was a pretty shitty thing to do, especially given the fact that The Undertaker's young, he's new, he's very conscious and worried about his spot, and he just wants to perform well. So if any of that's true, it just makes Hogan an even bigger piece of shit. when it comes to some of that political stuff that he has been accused of doing over the years. But, I can't really give any hardcore or concrete opinions on it because I really don't honestly know if that story is 100% true. So anyway, Christian, thank you for the question and my condolences again for the loss of your brother. And please feel free to email me anytime you would like. Take care of yourself. Christopher from Detroit, Michigan writes in, do you think AJ Styles will end his career in the WWE? Yeah, probably. The only other thing I can think of is that maybe WWE does something very rare and lets him go have a small, maybe retirement tour in Japan. As far as him working for TNA again, no way. I don't even think TNA will be in business by the time he finally retires. I mean, he's going to be 40 years old, or he is 40 years old, and he's still every bit as good as he was when he was 30 years old. And I think AJ can go for a lot more years, maybe at least 5 good ones, and then maybe 5 more as he's in the decline as maybe a more of a mid-card guy. Maybe not working for world titles. I mean, shit. I mean, how many more years can this guy do a phenomenal forearm? I mean, shit, Shawn Michaels did it into his late 40s, so I'm sure AJ can do the same. But by then, I don't even know what the fate of Impact Wrestling will be, so maybe WWE will be cool enough to let him go over to Japan and do something, maybe have a couple of farewell matches with some of his longtime rivals in front of that crowd, in front of that audience for those promotions. I think that would kind of be cool. Maybe make some kind of an appearance, maybe in Ring of Honor or somewhere else he might have worked. But as far as his overall career goes, yeah, at this point, I imagine him finishing his career in WWE because so far, his career in the WWE has not been a failure. They have put him on top since the minute he got there. It seems like they like him. He likes them. He's been a big part of what they've been doing in the last couple of years, and now he's the face of SmackDown, and SmackDown is the house that AJ built, and he's really being positioned as one of WWE's top guys, and I think he's going to be in the world title mix for as long as he can wrestle and stay healthy. And plus, when you think about it, there's no better place for him to end his career. I mean, he worked his entire career without coming to the WWE. The WWE is the pinnacle in professional wrestling. That's where you want to be. So the fact that he worked all those years away from Vince McMahon, never came in, despite getting offers, always turned them down, and continued to work on the independent scene and in Japan, and made himself a hell of a living. The fact that he's in WWE now is perfect because WWE is the company that can really enshrine and spotlight your legacy in the business. I mean, he can go out on top now. He can go into the WWE Hall of Fame. He can get a DVD done on his career. The WWE's ultimate marketing machine will cement AJ Styles' legacy in wrestling for the end of time. And a guy like AJ that did so much outside of the WWE, for him to get there finally at the end of his career and finish up there, that's pretty awesome. He lived the life. He got to work all over the world. He got to travel, and he never got soured by the WWE. He never had to deal with the politics in WWE. He stayed away from it for so many years that by the time he gets there now, none of that stuff is even going to be an issue for him. He's not a young up-and-comer, trying to make it to the top. He's already been on top forever, and he's already been WWE champion once since he's been there in the company. And the WWE has treated him very, very well, and he has returned the favor with some great matches and some great entertainment. So yeah, I hope AJ Styles does officially finish his career in WWE, but I would also like to see him make a few appearances here or there before he retires, maybe in some previous places he worked, besides TNA. WWE will never let him go back to TNA, but they might let him go over to Japan and do something. You never know. Aaron Mashtier writes in, DX versus Evolution, the importance of each faction and which one made the bigger impact. I'm going to go DX only because Evolution, I very much enjoyed Evolution. I liked the way it had Ric Flair, who was at one time the leader of the Four Horsemen back in the day, one of the most famous, if not the most famous faction ever, kind of acting as the manager role and the occasional wrestler of the group and the veteran. And then you had Triple H, the current leader, and then you had 2 new young guys in Randy Orton and Batista, as well as I thought all of that fit together and how it really launched Randy Orton and Batista into huge stars. I'm still going to pick DX as the one that made the bigger impact because DX was WWE's answer to the NWO. WWE was in big trouble around this time, and they were on the brink of, extinction because WCW was kicking their asses so bad. And Austin, even though he was there, he hadn't quite got on that map yet. The Bret Hart match at WrestleMania 13 had just happened. He was still a mid-card guy, not a world title guy. And even though he was over, he wasn't to the company-saving level of over that he would be a year later. So WWE needed to do something. They decided to turn Shawn Michaels heel, teamed him up with his real-life best friend Triple H, who most of the internet fans know are very good friends with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, who are running things down in WCW. So it was a really smart, I think, faction to build, because a lot of the fans that were around that time, everybody was, wrestling was so crazy white hot, and fans were very interested in what was going on behind the scenes, and the Kevin Nash and Scott Hall departures were very interesting. And then, the internet started getting a little bit bigger around this time. People were calling hotlines, subscribing to newsletters and reading about this. So putting Shawn and Triple H together, I thought was brilliant of the WWE, because now that was their answer to the NWO. And when the NWO wanted to be a little bit more edgy, DX would be even that much more edgy. And Vince McMahon made this announcement to everybody on Raw in late 97 after the Screwjob. He basically told everybody that they were going to go in a different creative direction. They had already started that. I think Sable had already stripped down to something by this point, and they did a few edgy things. But now it was going to get really crazy with some of the shit DX was doing, and they were going to get very adult and very TV-14. And DX arguably was just as entertaining as the NWO, despite the fact it was only two guys in China. They were entertaining fans and getting just as good a ratings as some of the stuff that the NWO was doing. So I think DX had the bigger impact as far as helping save Monday Night Raw, save the WWE in their war with WCW. The combination of DX and Stone Cold Steve Austin, I think together, and the emergence of The Rock, a year or so later, I think all really helped WWE win that war. And they all played the roles, and DX was huge. Evolution, on the other hand, as great as it was, I think WWE by that point would have been fine with or without Evolution. I don't really think it changed the company. Randy Orton is a guy that I think would have gotten opportunities anyway. WWE seemed to like him right off the bat. So I think Randy Orton could have been a huge star without Evolution, but maybe not Batista, because Batista was a last-minute addition when it was supposed to be Mark Jindrak, apparently, and they changed their mind and put Batista in there instead. So without Evolution, you could argue that Batista would not have become the star that he did. So Batista might be a casualty in that, but still overall, I'm going to pick DX over Evolution. Next one comes from Jameel Fuller. I believe I've answered a question of yours before in the past as well. This name looks familiar. But you want to know some wrestling what-ifs. And if I could give you 3 examples in my mind of wrestling what-ifs, like what if this didn't happen or what if that didn't happen. I don't know if I can narrow it down to 3. I mean, there's a million what-ifs in my head. But off the top of my head, I would probably have to say the Screwjob. I would be really interested to see how the business would have turned out had it not been for the Screwjob. Of course, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to the WWE. It led to the launch of Stone Cold Steve Austin character, the Mr. McMahon character, and the entire Attitude Era, really. And it just propelled them on this meteoric rise, and they completely demolished WCW and never looked back. So really, WWE probably wouldn't want that situation to change, but had it not happened, Bret Hart would have stuck around, and, we could have 2 people still alive had the Screwjob not happened. Theoretically, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith might still be alive today, maybe. I mean, think about it. Had Bret Hart stuck around, they would have continued the Hart Foundation faction probably for a while. Owen Hart probably wouldn't have gotten lost in the shuffle and had to be put back in the Blue Blazer gimmick. And Davey Boy Smith would have never gone to WCW, where he would severely injure his back when he was backdropped on the Ultimate Warrior's trap door. That led to him breaking his back and being laid up in the hospital for months. And he got severely addicted to morphine and I think some other pain medication. And then just a couple of years later, he passed away of a heart attack, probably due to a lot of his excessive drug use. So had he not gone to WCW and not gotten injured and not had that dark time in his life, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have suffered the heart attack that he did in 2002. He might have eventually died maybe a few years later, but we could have had Davey around a little bit longer as well. So when I think of the Screwjob not happening, not only do I see Bret Hart never exploding his relationship with the WWE, but also I see a couple of guys that might still be here today had that whole situation never happened. So it kind of makes me sad when I think about it like that. Also, back in the 80s, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Honky Tonk Man feud for the Intercontinental title. The story goes that Savage was set to win that title back. He had the big, long run with Honky for the IC belt in late 87, lasting all the way until early 88, and then they had that big main event special on prime time, like on Friday or Saturday night, that drew like the biggest rating in wrestling history with the big Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant rematch. But on the undercard, we had Honky Tonk Man defending the Intercontinental title against the Macho Man, and this was when the whole feud was going to blow off. Macho Man was set to win the belt back, and apparently something happened backstage. There's a story that says Honky didn't want to do the job, and they agreed somehow. I don't know how they allowed Honky to talk his way out of losing. I have no idea, especially when you follow the storyline. He needed to lose to Savage, and I remember being pissed that the match ended in a a count-out, I believe. But it ultimately led to Randy Savage going into WrestleMania 4 and winning the WWE title, which turned out better for him. So I would have been curious to see how the WrestleMania 4 tournament would have gone down had Randy Savage won the Intercontinental title from Honky Tonk Man. He probably would have had an Intercontinental title defense at WrestleMania instead of being in the tournament. So that was a big deal. Had that match gone a different way and Randy Savage regained the Intercontinental title and became a two-time champ, I don't know who they would have given the title to at WrestleMania. Probably Ted DiBiase, but then you have WrestleMania ending with a heel winning, and that would have been very strange to see, especially back then in 1988. They could have just put the belt back on Hulk Hogan, perhaps, or maybe put Hogan and Andre in a collision course to meet in the finals and have the rematch there or something. I don't know what the fuck they would have done. You'd have to go with DiBiase or Andre or Hulk. Nobody else would have made sense at the time. So I'd have been curious to see how the business worked out had Randy Savage beat the Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental title on the main event. And also, maybe Shawn Michaels going to WCW. There was a lot of talk back in early 97 prior to the screw job. Shawn was disgruntled. He was getting in backstage fights with Bret Hart. There was a lot of bad blood there. His drug use had really gotten hold of him, and he was just a walking, talking piece of shit that everybody hated, rubbed everybody the wrong way. Just a complete ass and a poison in the locker room. And he was miserable, and he hated his fucking job. And he really missed Click buddies Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and he wanted to go to WCW. You knew he did. I've mentioned this before, too. There's the famous picture of Shawn walking around backstage at a WWE house show wearing an Outsiders t-shirt. I mean, he got so much fucking heat for that. So I think it would have been really surreal to see Shawn show up on Nitro with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and join the NWO. And hell, I don't know, maybe even feud with Hogan. I don't think WCW would have done that. Hogan would have found a way to hold Shawn down. I have no doubt about that. So I don't know if Shawn would have been able to come in and feud with Hogan for leadership over the NWO. But Shawn had some pretty powerful allies in Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And who knows, maybe he would have been able to pull it off. And the curtain call in general. I mean, if the curtain call would have never happened, we would have gotten Triple H winning the King of the Ring in 96 instead of Stone Cold, which means no Austin 316 speech, which means no Austin 316 shirts. And speaking of the curtain call, what if Hall and Nash never left WWE? What if they would have re-signed with them and never gone to WCW and never formed the NWO? The business would have stalled. It would have kept going in that direction. The NWO and Hogan's heel turn really revolutionized everything and really kicked off the Monday Night Wars hardcore. I mean, that made it dirty, that made it bloody, and it resulted in some amazing moments in the wrestling business. And without the Monday Night Wars, half of us might not be wrestling fans today. So had Hall and Nash never left, WCW and WWE may not have changed that much. They might have stayed the course of what they were doing, and we would still have the hokey angles and the crazy gimmicks that we did back then in 1996. So there's a lot of what ifs, but there you go. There's a few of them for you right off the top of my head. Thanks for the question. Here's an interesting one. Alan from Westchester, Pennsylvania. Hey, good mic work. What is your real name? Well, finally, I get to publicly announce what my real name is here in a Q&A. I've never mentioned this before, but I've been thinking a lot about it because I don't want to be known necessarily as Good Mic Work. I don't mind it. You can call me Good Mic Work. You can continue to call me Good Mic Work, but part of me thinks that feels really impersonal. And I've been thinking about maybe putting my name out there in my commentaries a little bit more. I think of somebody like Salamonster. We all know him as the Salamonster, but he also has a first name, which is Jason. And I have a first name, which is Greg. There you go. Cat is out of the bag. My name is Greg Morgan. No relation to Matt Morgan. And I've been thinking for a long time about possibly integrating my name into my commentaries. Even with my intros, I've been thinking about starting things off like, welcome to Good Mic Work Commentaries episode whatever, this is your host Greg Morgan, something like that, instead of just saying, what's up, Good Mic Work, back at you, or whatever. I know my name is not Good Mic Work, and I don't like the type of YouTubers that try to play a wrestling character or anything like that. I'm not trying to do that. I want to be a real, actual person. And you guys can continue to call me Good Mic Work, I don't care, but you can also call me Greg if you would like, because that's my real name. Next one is from Bruce Gates. Bruce, you write in with a lot of feelings on wrestling theme music and how certain themes fit certain guys so perfectly, and how there's been some very iconic theme music over the years and some not so great theme music over the years. And basically your question, to give the Cliff's Notes version of what you're asking me, basically you just want to know what are some of my favorite and least favorite themes in wrestling history. Well, as many awesome themes as there are a lot of bad ones as well. And I can't even begin to tell you. I wouldn't even know where to start as far as the bad theme songs go. Shit like the Body Donnas and stuff like that. Music like that, I was just not a fan of. As far as my favorites, though, I have a lot. And my favorites are probably the same as a lot of your favorites. Now, currently, in today's day and age in WWE, there is some awesome WWE themes. I like virtually everybody's, especially a lot of the top stars. I feel like we're in that era again where wrestling theme music is good. A few years ago, I don't remember it being this good. And I think it's as good as it has been since, maybe like the mid-90s or late 80s even. A lot of these themes are becoming iconic. When you think of Bobby Roode and Shinsuke Nakamura, AJ Styles, Finn Balor, people like that. The theme music today is awesome. Back in the day, there was some great ones as well. I won't name anything beyond maybe the Attitude Era, but some of my favorites from back in the day, obviously Bret Hart, one of my favorite themes of all time. I love The Undertaker's, clearly, Razor Ramon, Gold Dust. I always enjoyed Diesel's babyface music as well. I thought that was great. Going back a bit earlier than that, random theme. This one is kind of odd, but I always really liked it. The Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich, when he came into WWE briefly in 1990. I loved his theme song. Jake the Snake Roberts, Ravishing Rick Rude. What about WWE's version of Ric Flair's theme back in the early 90s when he came in like 91? I loved that theme song. It's not the same song that made him famous because there was music rights issues with that and WWE probably didn't want to pay, so they came up with their own version, but their own version did not suck, and I actually enjoyed it. I also like the $1 Million Mans. A lot of the tag teams, I think of the Legion of Doom, how awesome their theme was. Demolition had a great theme, and even the Powers of Pain back in the day, in like 88 when they were there. I liked their theme song as well. So WWE's always had awesome themes. Jim Johnson did a fabulous job back in the 80s and 90s developing a lot of these theme songs, and I think he is long overdue for a Hall of Fame induction. So thank you for the question, Bruce. I appreciate it. Sticking with the theme music theme, Lincoln from Nashville, Tennessee asks if I collect any WWE music CDs along with my DVD and VHS collection. Well, yes, I have them all. I don't know if I have anything too modern. I stopped around, I don't know what year. I stopped with Reckless Intent. So I'm going to put a bunch of pictures up here and I'm going to show you what I've got. But I remember when the Full Metal album came out back in like 1995. I bought that. Then they had a Volume 2. Volume 3 was probably my favorite of all of them. That was an iconic album. It had everybody on there, Stone Cold and Undertaker and The Rock and Kane and Gangrel and the fucking Oddities and I don't know who else. I mean, it was just loaded with great songs. The Volume 4 was okay. Then it started getting stupid with Volume 5 and The Rock's Pie Song or whatever. I had their Aggression album, the Reckless Intent, and Theme Addict I have. And then if you go back even further than that, of course, I've got the Wrestling album CD. I think that was the first one they did in 1985. And as you see here, you got Jesse Ventura and Mean Gene and Vince on the cover. And you had theme songs like Hillbilly Jim and Junkyard Dog. And a lot of the, custom-made themes that they had early on at that time, along with some random songs of the stars just singing. Mean Gene had like Tutti Frutti on there or whatever the fuck. So that was kind of a goofy album. And here's something you might not see every day. What about the Pile Driver album? VHS tape, bitches. Don't you wish you had that? This thing is hilarious. Look that shit up on YouTube. And I remember the Pile Driver album and all the music videos that they did. And Coco Beware was a big part of this album. That was actually the name of his song, The Pile Driver. And the music video with Hulk Hogan and all those guys was pretty good. So I've always collected a lot of the theme music CDs, even though I don't do that anymore. Even Stone Cold had that Stone Cold Metal CD. I've got a copy of that right here. And here's an old school one. I have this, and it's hilarious. I'm not going to play any songs for you. Just go on YouTube. I'm sure you can find this stuff. But this thing came out around 98 or 99, and it was called Slammin' Wrestling Hits. And it was a music CD with all of the current wrestling stars of both WWE and WCW, some really shitty covers of all of these songs, and some of them are fucking ridiculous when you listen to them. And I don't remember paying for this, luckily, but I don't know how I got my hands on it. But if you just go on YouTube, just search for this thing. Here's a picture of it right here. Just find it and listen to how ridiculous some of these songs are. So back then, I was into collecting anything. Here's a CD that was sent to me. If you look here, it's that classic picture of the Click, and it says Wrestling Themes for Greg, which, of course, as I announced, is my name. And then when you flip it over, it's got a list of a lot of songs that were not available. WWE had not released any of these songs on any of their DVDs really at this point. And I believe this was sent to me by Don Tony, because as you see in the bottom here, the Extreme Wrestling Forum, I believe he was a part of that. And speaking of Don Tony, I also had a 4-disc collection that he sent me, I'd say back in 2005. He had called it Anthology, because if you remember, WWE had that album Anthology that came out. And as a matter of fact, I own that CD here. I just can't find it. I would show it to you if I had it. I just don't know where the hell it is. And I remember at the time there was a little bit of controversy with that CD because there was some weird additions to it. Like they had some songs on there that made no sense, and then there was a lot of songs that they left out. So somehow there was this big 100-song set. You know, somebody had gotten it somehow from the WWE, crystal clear audio of every WWE theme. And this is everybody. This is like going way back to the 80s, themes that were not released yet. If you found them on the internet, it was dubbed over with crowd noise and it just sounded like shit. These were all legit themes, and it had everybody, literally everybody, any wrestler that had theme music at all was on this list. And it was a pretty cool 4-disc set. And I remember I bought it for him, or he sent it to me as a gift. I don't even remember. But I used to be pretty big into collecting wrestling theme music back then. Little did I know, you could just go on YouTube or go on Google and find anything you want with the click of your index finger. It was a lot harder back in the day. But there you go. There's the answer to your question. Yes, I definitely collect WWE music CDs. Next one comes from Christian from QCCA. I guess that means Quebec City, Canada. You write in, "Hi, good mic work. Have you ever thought about doing a video format for your commentaries, even if it's just for the big 4 pay-per-views like the Rumble, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Mania?" Well, actually, yes, I have thought about that. I've actually been thinking about doing that for a long time. Surprise, here I am. This is what I look like. I don't think I've ever appeared on camera in any of my commentaries before, maybe once or twice. But yes, I've been thinking about doing a few more on-camera things. Not often, though. Audio is much, much easier to edit than video, and plus, I don't like to have to be on camera all the time if I don't have to be. I don't want to have to be prepared for it. Sometimes when I'm recording, I can just get it done when I'm just doing audio, like podcast form stuff. But I have been thinking about doing some more videos like on screen. And one of the things I've been thinking about is actually these Q&As. So maybe for my next one, just maybe, I'll do some sort of a live stream. That might be easier. I don't know how many people will watch a live stream from me. I've never even done it before, so I have to decide if it's even worth it. But it might be worth a shot to at least, you know, see how it goes and see what the reaction is and if people enjoy hanging out. So I've never streamed anything live. I'd have to take some tutorials. If any of you out there have any advice for me on how to do this, please send it my way. But I'm sure I can teach myself how to do it when the time comes. I did recently buy a nice webcam, or at least a decent one. The only thing is I have to get better with my audio and video editing, because when I plug in the camera and the microphone together, it diminishes the quality of the microphone. I don't have any sort of in-between platform. I don't plug this thing into an Audacity or another video editing program. I don't have a mixer or anything like that. I'm just kind of plugging the shit straight in. So for the live Q&As, I would want to make sure that the quality is the best before I did anything like that. I wouldn't want it to interrupt. I wouldn't want it to look like shit. I would want to do it properly. So I'll start looking into it, maybe teach myself some things, and who knows, maybe one day you'll get me in a live Q&A type of format. So that's probably what I will do if I ever appear on screen. It'll probably be like in a Q&A form, or maybe some special videos here or there. But, you know, for me personally, it's just a lot easier to keep it in the podcast form because it makes my life easier. I already dedicate a lot of time to these commentaries as it is. Either way, I wanted to make sure I came up here at least once and talked to all of you face to face because I've never really talked face to face with any of you before. And this was kind of a different experience for me. So, you know, the most of you who listen to my Q&As as well, you're all hardcore fans. You know, most people who just casually listen to me probably don't listen to my Q&As all the way through. So this is kind of a special treat for you. Those of you who are viewing this right now, I know you are the most dedicated fans that I have. So I just wanted to look you all in the eye and say thank you for all of the support over the years. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully I can continue to do this for many years to come. And yes, the channel must evolve. All channels must evolve. And since I don't appear on camera very often, that can be something new. That can be something fresh, something different to do from time to time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to come up here and show you guys what I look like. This is my office, by the way. This is where all the good mic work, commentary, magic happens. I sit right here at my computer and I record everything I need. All of my collectibles and my bullshit and my videotapes and my DVDs are right here behind me. I feel like I have a nice background set up. So yeah, I would be interested in appearing on camera a little bit more from time to time, but it's definitely not something that I'm going to do frequently. But yeah, so it's cool to actually see you guys face to face and say hello. And let's get back to the normal part of the commentary now, and I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. See you later. We have Mike at Degenerate ESQ on Twitter from Teesside in the UK. You wrote in with a bunch of questions, a lot of them Undertaker related. I'll answer one or two of those. You also asked me if I think that the tag team wrestling division should get the same attention and respect as the rejuvenated women's division has. In other words, you know, maybe making a tag team revolution. And I definitely think the answer is yes. I think the WWE has half-assed tried this. It's not like the WWE necessarily has bad tag teams right now. There's some really good teams on the roster, but it just doesn't have that special feeling that it used to. And tag team wrestling in the WWE has gone so up and down over the years. I remember in the 90s, it sucked. I mean, your biggest tag teams were the Quebecers and teams thrown together like Marty Jannetty and Bob Holly, or Marty Jannetty and the 1-2-3 Kid, or Bam Bam Bigelow and Tatanka, or Skip and Zip. I mean, the tag team division was really a pile of shit back in the 90s. And the last time I can remember really enjoying it was the mid and late 80s when you had the Harts and the Bulldogs, Can-Ams, Islanders, teams like that, Killer Bees. I love those days of tag team wrestling in the WWE, and the NWA had some great shit too with the Horsemen and the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express. So tag team wrestling was awesome in the 80s. It was so-so in the 90s. Now it seems like it's trying to make a comeback, but you're right. It just doesn't have that feel. And even though I think WWE would like to increase interest in tag team wrestling, they really haven't succeeded in that too much. I mean, it has its moments. We've had some great tag team matches. We've even seen some tag team title matches, main event Raws and SmackDowns lately, and they've been kind of a big deal on pay-per-views on both brands. So I wouldn't necessarily say the tag team division currently is a total failure, but it definitely could use some work as well. So I pretty much agree with your question there. You're also asking me my thoughts on the supernatural wrestling characters like The Undertaker and Kane. Do I think The Undertaker could have gotten over in today's day and age if he just debuted? Probably not, just the way wrestling is now. We've seen how Bray Wyatt has been treated. I would imagine Undertaker would probably be treated the same way, especially if he was not the current chosen one and he's on a roster with guys like Cena and Roman Reigns. And even though I think Taker would be a decent-sized star, he wouldn't be the legend that he is today. And, you know, back in the day, he was in the right place at the right time, worked with the right guys, got over. And then when WWE started going into the decline in the mid-90s and Hogan left for WCW, Undertaker was elevated even that much more to where he became one of the top guys in the company. And later on, because of his longevity and his ability to stay fresh and change up his character and remain over with the fans for so long, he had the career that he had. So I don't think if Undertaker debuted in 2017 that he would become an icon. I just don't see it happening. But as far as the supernatural characters go, I really am not a fan, you know, but luckily The Undertaker and Kane were so good at those characters, I let it go. I could tolerate lightning bolts and shit being set on fire and buried alive matches, which was another one of your questions. You wanted to know how they do that stunt because obviously these guys aren't actually being buried alive. I really don't know what the hell they do. They go into a box or a container or something when the camera is not showing and then they dump dirt onto that. I remember in the first ever buried alive match when Taker went in the hole, and they started burying him. The camera cut away, and it didn't even seem like it was cut away for very long, but when it came back like 10 seconds later, you didn't even see The Undertaker anymore. He was completely, quote-unquote, buried in dirt. So I'm not exactly sure how they do it, but clearly it's gimmicked. It's just like, you know, when they open up a casket and nobody's in it, and then they open it up later on, and Undertaker comes out, he's just hiding under the ring or some shit. So they have their ways of doing that. But getting back to the supernatural characters, I would normally hate those characters. They wouldn't be something I would want in wrestling. But the Undertaker Kane stuff back in the day, especially when it first started, was a lot of fun. And I could look past the silliness of it when they would inject a little bit more seriousness, maybe, because Kane and the Undertaker were both badasses. Bray Wyatt is also a badass. And somehow they made it believable. And The Undertaker could go dark at times. You know, when he crucified Austin and when he kidnapped Stephanie, that made the whole thing, you know, okay in my eyes. It wasn't so cartoony when they did shit like that, and I enjoyed it. So I'm not a fan really of the supernatural characters, but what The Undertaker and Kane did were two of my favorite careers and legacies in WWE history. So thank you for your questions. I'm going to stop now because I feel like I could talk for another 30 minutes on all the stuff you asked me, but I appreciate your support, Mike. Next one comes from a very awesome listener, Barry from Hawaii. Barry and I actually met. As most of you know, I went on vacation to Hawaii a couple of months ago because I had to make a couple of announcements about that for my commentary schedule on the YouTube channel. Well, Barry DM'd me on Twitter and said that he lives on the same island that I was visiting, and he actually drove up to my resort and met me. And I feel really bad, Barry, because that morning I was hungover as shit. And we spent a few minutes together. It was really cool, and I appreciate you coming up. I think right now you're the only fan I've ever met in person. I've had a few people message me before when I happen to be in their town, but I haven't been able to work something out. But luckily you came to me. I spent most of my time at the resort anyway, and you showed right up there to meet me, and we chatted a little bit about wrestling. It was really awesome, so always nice to hear from you. Your question is kind of cool. You want to know what two current wrestlers would I put into a primetime wrestling type of show? And I think back to the days of primetime with Gorilla and Bobby, and I'm trying to think of who you could put in there today that would be entertaining. And the cool thing is there are so many people that would be good at this. I mean, when you think of what they just did with Southpaw Wrestling, pretty much everybody involved in that would be perfect for a primetime setting. So as I think about it a little bit, I would have to say number one, Kevin Owens. Kevin Owens is so hilarious. He would be perfect in the role of Bobby Heenan. I would love to put Chris Jericho with him, but I don't think you can have two heels or two guys with a similar personality. I think you have to have one guy that's constantly talking shit and somebody else that's more straight-laced. So, you know, off the top of my head, aside from Kevin Owens, who would be a good partner for him chemistry-wise? Maybe somebody easygoing and nice. You could even put a woman with him. Maybe Bayley. Somebody like Bayley with her personality. Maybe Mick Foley. That would be good. Mick Foley and Kevin Owens. Mick Foley can be more of your Gorilla Monsoon, and Kevin Owens can be like your Bobby Heenan. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot of guys. I think Tyler Breeze. I think Fandango. I think Rusev. Corey Graves. There's a lot of people in WWE that I think would be good in that role. But if I'm trying to recreate the feeling we got from Bobby and Gorilla, I would have to say Kevin Owens and Mick Foley. Dustin Eaton, longtime listener. I know I've answered a question of yours once or twice before in the past. I like your question because it's going to get me some heat, and I don't care. You want to know, in a legit fight, who wins? Brock Lesnar, Haku, or Mad Dog Bashan? All three guys are nuts. All three guys are very crazy. I'm supposed to say Haku, right? Automatically, Haku, toughest guy in the business. That's what everybody says. Every single story you've heard in shoot interviews, Haku could take on a tank and win. However, I'm picking Brock. I'm just picking Brock. Brock's a fighter. Brock's been trained to fight. Haku, I have no doubt, is one of the toughest people walking planet Earth and could win any bar fight that he's in. But if you put him in UFC, I don't know if he's going to win because he's not necessarily a trained fighter. He's very tough. It's impossible to hurt a guy like Haku. I know he knows some stuff and he probably does have a little bit of experience in some form of martial arts, but Brock Lesnar is a wrestler, a shoot fighter, a guy that's been trained to take people down and choke them out and all of that. And if you put Haku and Brock out in the street and have them fight, it might not be an easy fight for Brock. He might have to keep pounding away at Haku because Haku just won't go down, or he might have to choke him out or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think Brock wrestles him down and pins him down and chokes him out. Now, if the two guys just stand there and take turns punching each other in the face, then I'm picking Haku, hands down, because I don't think you can knock Haku out. But in an actual real fight of those three guys, Brock is the better trained of all of them. And I don't want to not pick Haku. I can't believe I'm picking Haku to lose a fight. But, if he's actually really fighting Brock Lesnar, a trained fighter, I don't think he's going to win. Maybe if they're both drunk. If you add some stipulations in here, like I said, if the two of them just stand in front of each other and take turns punching each other in the face, then I think Haku wins. If they're both hammered in a bar and they just get in a bar fight with a bunch of people around and bar stools and bar tables and glasses and beer bottles and everything like that, I also think Haku might win that. He'll pick up a beer bottle and smash Brock Lesnar across the face with it and then shove a bar stool up his ass. But if you put him in the octagon, I'm picking Brock. So I guess it just kind of depends. But, when you think of legit fighters in wrestling, who is more credible than Brock at this point in the history of the business? I would love to see Brock Lesnar get his hands on some assholes that wrestling used to have in the 1980s. I think of somebody like Ken Patera, one of the most miserable, asshole-ish people you would ever see. If you ever look up some of his shoot interviews, he seems like the most bitter son of a bitch ever. And he just still sounds like such a cocky, tough guy. And I just wish he would have ran into somebody like Brock back in the day who would shut his fucking mouth. Billy Jack Haynes is another guy. Big, bad, and tough, but if you put an actual trained fighter in front of him, he's going to go down. We saw what happened when Bart Gunn took on Butterbean at WrestleMania 15. I imagine it would be something like that. Jackie from right here in San Diego writes in, "Hi, good mic work. I'm a huge fan of your channel and have been since 2015. Please never stop doing what you're doing and keep up the good work. My question to you is, do you remember the story of the Dynamite Kid and Jacques Rougeau fight from the WWE back in the 1980s? What is your opinion on this backstage altercation, and what is your opinion on backstage fights in general?" Well, as far as backstage fights in wrestling, that's never going to stop. Even today when the boys are so well behaved, and everything is so structured and so crazy, I don't think you see fights quite as often today. You're probably more likely to see those in a bar or a restaurant after the fact between talent, but they're definitely not as common. But back in the day, people didn't care. There was no management. You couldn't get in trouble. You couldn't get sent down to NXT. The only person you really had to worry about was Vince McMahon. And back in the 80s, in the 70s and prior to that, when these incidents would take place, there was really nothing that was done about it. And there was rarely any punishment. But when you have a locker room full of jacked up guys all jockeying for their position on the roster and on the card, you're going to have some wires crossed, you're going to have some altercations, and not everybody is going to get along with everybody. So my opinion on backstage fights are the same as any backstage fight in any sport. You have teammates fighting each other in basketball and football and baseball during practice and scrimmages and things like that. So, locker room fights are something that goes on in all forms of sports and entertainment, and wrestling is definitely no different. As far as the Dynamite Kid, Jacques Rougeau situation, I don't really blame Jacques. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, he's a pussy, it was a sucker punch. I guess he just felt like he had to do what he had to do. Raymond was always known as the tougher Rougeau. He was apparently a badass. And I think if the story that I remember is that he was injured around this time. I think he was on crutches or had a broken ankle or something. So had Raymond been able to have Jacques' back, I don't think Jacques would have needed the roll of quarters. But I can't remember who gave him the advice. Jacques has told the story many times. We've heard it from many wrestlers. Bret Hart has even told a couple of versions of the story a time or two in shoot interviews and in his book too, I believe. But basically, Dynamite Kid was known in the locker room as a bully. He was just a jackass. He was a jerk. He was probably on a lot of drugs, definitely on steroids, especially when you look back at Dynamite Kid's early work in Stampede and the fact that he literally tripled in size by the time he was in the WWE in the late 80s. It was pretty crazy, and he was just a dick, and he would bully people around and push around whoever he felt like he could, and apparently he was messing with Jacques Rougeau, and Jacques had enough. He said, I got to stand up to this guy, and he just got his revenge the way he saw fit. And I can't really judge. I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I had to fight the Dynamite Kid one-on-one, but I also have to put a stop to his bullshit, so I might have reacted the same way. Yeah, it might be the cowardly way out, but, what if Dynamite Kid ducked the punch? Or what if Dynamite Kid countered the punch and a real fight broke out? Jacques could have been fucked. So it had to take a little bit of guts to actually confront him like that. But yeah, the story goes as he put a roll of quarters in his hand and was standing in the hallway, and when Dynamite was walking by, just out of nowhere, just nailed him right in the mouth as hard as he could with his fist full of a roll of quarters and knocked a bunch of Dynamite's teeth out. And I remember Bret Hart telling the story, like, Dynamite just dropped to one knee. Like, he didn't even get knocked completely out. He didn't even fall backwards. He just dropped to one knee, spit a bunch of teeth into his hand, and stumbled away. I mean, he is a tough son of a bitch. So a big part of me never likes to see anyone sucker punched. I think that's a horrible way to fight and a horrible thing to have happen to you. But if you've got it coming, who really cares? I guess that's karma, So really, I don't really pick a side in this. I just think if I was in Jacques Rougeau's shoes, I may have done the same thing. And as far as Dynamite Kid goes, I would never be in his shoes because I would never be an asshole to the level that Dynamite Kid apparently was back in the day in the locker room. He was not well liked. Next question is from Tony Talent or Tony Talent. I think I've answered a question of yours in the past as well. Your question is, what are some of my favorite wrestling-related podcasts to listen to? Now, I answer this one every now and then, and I know I've answered it before, but I still enjoy listening to the same ones, with the exception of one. I still listen to Jim Ross, I still listen to Chris Jericho, and I listen to Steve Austin. Of those three, I probably enjoy Jericho's the most. Probably Jim Ross second, Austin third, but I think all of them do great jobs. But lately, I have been straight up addicted to Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson. Those guys are fucking great, and they discuss just one topic at a time, but they spend like 3 hours on it, because Bruce has got a brain full of memories of working in the WWE behind the scenes for like 25 years, producing so many segments and being a part of the creative process, and he just has so many stories and so much knowledge that it's made for some of the best podcast material I have ever heard. And Conrad is a great host. His show prepping ability is some of the best I've ever seen. He really gets into detail on a lot of things, and they talk about so much that I remember. They answer so many questions that I've always wanted to know. So lately, I've been addicted to theirs, and I've only been listening to them probably for the past maybe 2 months. So I need to start checking out some more. I really want to start listening to Edge and Christian's podcast. I've heard a little bit of Ric Flair's. I've heard a little bit of Booker T's. I've heard a little bit of Taz's. Not a huge fan of any of those, but, you know, they're all pretty decent in their own right as well. And then as far as my colleagues go, people that do what I do on YouTube or on radio sites or whatever, obviously Monster. I'll check out him from time to time. Not every week, but I try to listen to him whenever I can. I listen to a little bit of Steven Larson as well, a little bit of Don Tony and Kevin Castle, a little bit of Wrestling Soup. There's some really good podcasts out there that offer a lot of insight and give us a lot of diverse opinions on everything that goes on in wrestling. And I think that's what's cool about all of us, is that you can literally go to certain people's sites or certain people's podcasts if you want a certain opinion. You know, some people are going to give you more harsh, direct to the point opinions. Some people are going to be more like me, kind of in the middle, kind of like to be as fair as possible, look at both sides. So you can really get a whole different slew of opinions all over YouTube, all over Stitcher, iTunes, MLW, places like that. And there's just a bunch of good podcasts out there. So I've only mentioned a few, but I think there's a lot more good ones than what I just mentioned. But if I'm ever listening to anything other than working on my own shit, those are some of the podcasts that I do find myself listening to. All right, next up, I'm going to answer a couple more non-wrestling related questions. I always get a ton of those in every Q&A, and I try to keep most of this Q&A wrestling related, but I will branch off and talk about some other things here or there, as you guys have clearly seen from me before. The first one is from Corey from Utica, New York. Where were you during 9/11? Wow. I think we all have a 9/11 story, those of us who are old enough. It's been 16 years now, as of the recording of this commentary, since September 11th, 2001, and that was just a crazy day. I mean, we all remember where we were. For me personally, I was still asleep, and my best friend, I have a female best friend, I've known her my whole life, and this was back in the days of regular telephones. Like, I was living in an apartment by myself, and I didn't have a cell phone, so I just had a regular phone and an answering machine. So I'm in my bedroom sleeping like a lazy piece of shit, and my phone is ringing, and of course I'm not about to get out of bed and walk into the living room to answer the phone, so I just let it ring, and the answering machine picks up, and I hear my friend say, dude, you might want to wake up and turn on your fucking TV. She knew I was asleep. And she goes, if you don't call me back in 10 minutes, I'm coming over and banging on your door. And I was like, holy shit. So I get out of bed and I immediately turn on the TV, and the first plane had just hit. So there was only one plane that had hit at the time. So naturally I turned it on, and I sat right there in my boxer shorts and no shirt on, because it's the end of the summer. It's hot as hell. I was living on Carolina Beach in North Carolina during that time, and the summer was just coming to an end, but it was still hot and humid as shit. And I'm sitting there completely stunned. I give her a call back just to let her know I got the message, and we were talking a little bit about it. And then she ended up coming over later that day, but she's like, I'll come over, around lunchtime later on, and we'll see what the fuck's going on. I'm like, okay, cool, talk to you later, goodbye. And I continue watching the news coverage. And I remember, I think it was, I don't know what channel I was watching, I think at some point during the day, all networks, like every network, even MTV, was covering this. But during the first plane hitting, it was still looked at as an accident. They were getting all these interviews from eyewitnesses, and some people were saying it was a little tiny plane. And so it was just kind of coming across as an accident, going to show how little we had to worry about back then. Nobody even thought of a terrorist attack. Back then, it seemed like things were going pretty well in this country. We didn't think about stuff like this. Even though an attack happened on the World Trade Center back in '93, it didn't bring it down or anything. It was just a small bomb that they were able to repair all the damage there. And this time, it was a lot more serious, clearly. So I'm watching the news network. I want to say it was NBC, whatever fucking channel it was. But the second plane starts coming, and it fools the broadcasters because they're watching the footage, and I hear them say, here's a replay of what we saw earlier on, and then somebody else is like, no, it's not. That's not a replay. That's another plane. And then everybody just erupts with screams in the background. They're like, holy shit. And, you guys can go online. It's very morbid to watch, but there's tons of footage of the 9/11 attacks, and it's crazy how all of that happened, in the day and age we live with cameras, and everybody got footage of this. Imagine if that happened now. I mean, we're even more advanced. Now we've got iPhones and galaxies in our pocket, and we can take videos of everything everywhere. Back in 2001, it wasn't that common, but still a lot of people got footage of this. And it's pretty tough to watch even to this day. But the news network, not even realizing that was a second plane at first, was really eerie, and I'll never forget that. And so I pretty much did what a lot of people did, I think. I just sat on my couch. I barely moved all day. My friend came over later on, and by that point, it was clear that this was a terrorist attack. By that point, the Pentagon had been attacked. The other plane in Pennsylvania, I think, had crashed. So all of that was happening by the time she got there, and we just kind of looked at each other like, you want to get drunk? And we walked across the street because I lived right there on the beach, just a little convenience store. She got a bottle of wine. I got a 12-pack, literally, of beer. And we just sat there in awe and watched this. We both called people. I called my parents and talked to them. The girl I was seeing at the time, my girlfriend, was across town working at her job, and her mother was a flight attendant. So I immediately called her first. I'm like, is your mom okay? Have you talked to her? She goes, yeah, she's not even flying today. She's at home or whatever. I'm like, holy shit, can you believe this? And she goes, I think they might send us home from work early. I'm going to go home and be with my parents and watch this crap. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm over here. If you want to stop by, feel free. And she's like, I'll talk to you later. This is fucking crazy. And so that's all I really did. I just called a couple of people that I cared about and checked on them, and we talked a little bit about it. And then I just sat right there with my friend and got wasted on my couch watching what seemed to be the end of the world. And that was a crazy day, man. Crazy fucking day. And of course, we all remember WWE was the first, I think, gathering of anybody inside of an arena after 9/11. I mean, all the planes were grounded. Every plane was grounded. Nobody could fly anywhere. I think the wrestlers and the workers were stuck, wherever they were, I think in Texas maybe. And then they came out and they did SmackDown a couple of days later. And of course, Lillian Garcia and that rendition of the national anthem. I'm not even a very patriotic person. I'm not really a big believer in national pride at all. But I would be lying to you if I didn't say I shed a tear when she sang that song, because that was pretty powerful and pretty moving stuff. And that was a dark day in our country's history and in the history of the world. But as far as my memories of it, and that you were also specific, by the way, Corey, I want to mention that you weren't asking my political opinions on 9/11 or anything like that. You just wanted to know what I thought of it, what were my memories of that day. And that's all I'm going to talk about. That's basically all I did. And I'm sure a lot of you who are old enough had a similar story. You probably sat right there and watched nonstop coverage all day, all night, into the morning, all of the damage and the destruction, and when the numbers were coming in and how many people were probably dead. It was staggering. And it was like something out of a movie. I mean, the videos of those planes hitting the building and them exploding and the towers collapsing. I mean, it's literally like fucking Armageddon. It's absolutely crazy. The damage that was done that day and how nuts it was. But yeah, I sat right there and watched about 10 hours of news footage like most of the country and most of the world did, I'm sure. So yeah, that was pretty nuts. Moving on now to a subject a little bit more pleasant. I have had a lot of questions over the years in my Q&As about music. And a lot of times I only answer one or two here or there. This is a collection of questions that I've been saving for the past, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. I think even one of these questions was from a year ago, and I kind of put them in a folder with all my other music questions. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some random music questions. Now, these questions come from Mark from Manchester, Tony from Queens, Jasper from Toronto, Megan from Indianapolis, and Logan from Virginia. This is a variety of questions. All of these people asked me more than one, so I kind of picked out a few of my favorite questions or some of the ones I found the most interesting. Favorite Beatles song? It's really hard to pick one. It's like asking me my favorite Bret Hart match. There's just too goddamn many, but gun to my head, I'm going to go with While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Favorite Van Morrison song? Hands down, Tupelo Honey. Favorite Guns N' Roses song? Hands down, November Rain. Favorite Aerosmith album? I would have to say Toys in the Attic and Pump. Favorite Fleetwood Mac song? I don't know if I have a favorite on those. I love Stevie Nicks. She's one of my favorites. I'll give you my favorite album, though. It was like the reunion album that they did. It was like a live concert about 20 years ago now. I think it was like early, mid, to late 90s, somewhere in there, probably 1997. It was called The Dance, and one of my favorite songs on that album was Tusk, and they brought out the USC marching band to fucking play the song. It was kick-ass. So if you've never seen that, look it up. Also got a question about Cat Stevens, if I like him. Yes, absolutely. Some of my favorite songs from him is First Cut is the Deepest and Wild World, and he's got a lot of good ones, but those are two of my favorites. Of course, Bob Dylan, I absolutely love. I grew up to him in the 70s. David Bowie, Queen, Rolling Stones, bands like that. Loved all that shit. I got a favorite Madonna song question. I've been holding on to this question for like a year. Favorite Madonna song? I don't know, man. I don't really like Madonna. I think she's kind of pretentious. But she had some great hits back in the day. I'd probably have to go with Live to Tell. It was one of the songs featured in this 80s movie with Christopher Walken and Sean Penn. I just love that song. Look it up if you've never heard it. It's a great song. Some of my other favorite 80s and 90s female performers, which is another question that I got. Loved Whitney Houston back in the 80s. She had an amazing voice. So sad what happened to her. I loved early 90s Mariah Carey. I didn't like it when she became all gangsta and stuff, but early Mariah Carey was, I mean, she rivaled Whitney as far as her voice goes. And I love that Unplugged concert she did on MTV. That was, to me, that was Mariah at her best. Loved me some TLC. If you want to go back to the 80s and talk about some rock and roll, got to go with Hart, Pat Benatar, and of course Stevie Nicks, who I mentioned before. Got a question about some of my favorite 80s bands. I listened to everybody. I loved the 80s. I loved all the top hit bands back then. I listened to Duran Duran, Rush, Hart, U2, Tom Petty, Eric Clapton, Van Halen, INXS, Dire Straits, which I'll never forget back in the early 90s. I decided back when I was younger, and I think we all had these impressionable days, and I bought a car, and I was just a teenager, and I decided that my car needed a system. I had a couple of friends, a couple of neighbors next door that started getting really into that work, like installing those big subwoofer speakers, you know, and the big sound systems. And even though I liked rap very much, I wasn't really primarily a rap guy. And those type of sound systems were, to me, just designed to show off your bass. You know, you really couldn't hear anything, but I still got the speakers put in. Generally would turn the bass down, but the bass would still be enough to rattle the whole car. And one of the songs that I tested and showed off my speakers with was Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. It sounded so awesome in this souped up sound system that I had in this little Nissan with tinted fucking windows. It only lasted a year. I ended up getting rid of the system because it was giving my battery some problems. And those of you who might have done that to your car, you know what I'm talking about. The big box with the two speakers and you put it in your trunk up against your two back seats. I had that whole thing going on and eventually grew out of it and just bought a car that had a nice enough sound system in it that I didn't have to do that. But I always remember that Dire Straits song and testing out my speakers with it. But I also still have all the albums from all the cheesy 80s bands, The Foreigners, The Survivors, Journey, Whitesnake, Poison, Motley Crue, the big hair bands. I was into pretty much everything. 80s R&B and rap, kind of. I remember listening to New Edition back in the day, and Belle Biv DeVoe, and Boys to Men. Lionel Richie comes to mind for some odd reason. But yeah, a lot of 80s kind of R&B stuff that I would listen to and still have fond memories of. In the 90s, you know, I was a big rap fan, but you know, I didn't branch out that far. I'm pretty typical. You know, I like Snoop, I like Dre, Tupac. I loved Naughty by Nature back in the early 90s. They kind of predated all those other guys, but of course Big E as well. Also liked some of the dance mixes. I was more of a rocker, but I enjoyed listening to stuff like Heavy D, you know, and shit like that back in the day. And some of my favorite 90s rock bands, a lot of the usual suspects. I love Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, Chili Peppers. I loved Weezer, REM, Green Day, Silverchair, Candlebox, Alanis Morissette, all those crazy 90s rock grunge type bands. Loved all that stuff. I'm not a big music listener today. I actually don't really listen to anything modern. I have no concept of Bruno Mars and people like that. I am completely illiterate. And I feel like an absolute moron when people try to talk about music today because I just don't know anybody. I don't watch MTV. I don't listen to any radio stations that play the new stuff. I never watch the Grammys. I am literally completely unaware of the music scene today. I completely suck. To me, if I had to define myself, the only thing I really stay away from is country. I'm not a country music fan at all. I know some people are. I just can't stand it. I don't mind if you do. I have a lot of friends that absolutely adore country music. I just don't get it, and I don't like it. But as far as everything else, I'm pretty flexible. I don't have one specific style. I'm definitely more rock and roll. Love classic rock and the singer-songwriter type of stuff. But I'm not above listening to rap or R&B or if I have to pop in some Whitney Houston tonight, I'll do it. I don't give a shit. So I'm just nostalgic as fuck when it comes to music. I prefer the music that produced a lot of the memories in my head. Sometimes when you listen to a song, it takes you right back to where you were. I really miss the old days, and I love thinking about the times when I was younger. Nothing against now. I'm perfectly happy today and now, and I'm not living or stuck in the past or anything like that. But from a musical standpoint, I just prefer listening to what I always have listened to, and I'm not interested in branching out. And part of that is lazy, and part of that is I just don't care. To me, music is not a major thing in my life. I like music, but some people, music is like their number one. Music is their wrestling. One of my friends is like that. He absolutely lives for music, goes to every concert he can find, knows all about local bands, can name every band member from every band, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. He knows the drummer, he knows the bassist, he knows everybody, who they are, where they came from, who they played with previously. He's one of those guys. He's like a Trekkie for music. So I don't take it to that degree. I just like what I like and leave it at that. And these days when I'm driving around in the car, every now and then I'll put on an album or something. But for the most part, I find myself listening to podcasts and shit like that now when I'm driving. So there's lots of options and lots of ways to keep yourself busy when you're driving in a car. When I travel on the airplane, I'm the same way with my headphones, although when I'm in an airport, for some reason I listen to a lot of Beatles, and I also listen to a lot of Pearl Jam. That was another question I got, by the way, was what is my favorite band ever? And I think if I had to narrow it down, I would probably say Pearl Jam. I know that's a lot of people's favorite band, but I love them. Some of their albums were just amazing, and they're still going to this day. I loved a lot of their early stuff. Their first couple of albums was great. I loved 10, and I loved Versus. And then they did the Unplugged album, which I think on that album, which came out in 92, they did that on MTV. State of Love and Trust is my favorite song on that album. Put some headphones on and rock that shit at full blast and tell me that won't change your life. So that's some random music questions. I know that was really random as hell. I just had all those questions written down, and I've been saving them for all these months, so I figured I would just knock them all out together in one segment. So I know it was a little jumbled up, and I was all over the place there, but I had to get out some music questions, so there you go. Next one comes from Craig Lazo. Hi, good mic work. I've been listening to your show for a long time, but I've never sent a question, so here goes. In your opinion, who is the least deserving WWE champion in history? Thanks for all the countless hours of entertainment and at least giving this question a look, even if you don't answer it. Peace. Well, thank you for your question. This is kind of a good one and also kind of a tough one. I'm going to omit anything that took place maybe in the 60s and 70s, because there was a lot of weird things going on with the title back then. Buddy Rogers was the first ever champion, and he only held the belt for a few days. Stan Stasiak didn't hold the belt very long. My good friend, Ivan Koloff, had a very brief cup of coffee with the title. You had a couple of funny title changes and some that went unacknowledged by WWE. I believe Antonio Inoki even won the belt, only for WWE to totally ignore it. So back in the day, there was a lot of weird shit going on, so I don't know if I'm really the right person to judge if somebody deserved it or didn't deserve it. So when I think of all of the WWE champions in history, you can throw out the obvious ones, like when the celebrities and shit win titles. David Arquette obviously winning in WCW, Vince winning the WWE title and the ECW title and shit like that. So I'm also going to omit those because those are so obvious. Obviously, people like that didn't deserve to win the belt. So I'm going to go with some weird ones. I'm going to go with the type of champions that came in and won the belt very early after their debut and won the belt purely for storyline reasons. And one of the very first names that comes to mind is a WWE legend and a Hall of Famer and an awesome guy. And you're probably going to be surprised that I'm saying this, but I'm going to go with Sergeant Slaughter. Sergeant Slaughter wasn't around in the WWE for a long time. He worked for Vince's dad. I believe he worked a very short time for Vince when Vince first took over in the early 80s, and then he left, and he went off and did other things. And he didn't return to the company until 1990. A good 6-year or possibly even 7-year absence from the company. He comes back in and I think debuts at like SummerSlam or in the summer of 1990. And by Royal Rumble, he's WWE Champion. And the only reason that he won the title was because Vince McMahon had this brilliant idea to run a storyline parallel with the Iraq War and have Slaughter come back as a heel, as an Iraqi sympathizer, win the belt and drop it to Hogan in a great American moment at WrestleMania. So when you look at guys that deserve the title because of their hard work and them working their way to the top of the card, guys like Bret Hart, who started out in a tag team and went through the mid-cards and eventually made it to the pinnacle of the WWE title, when you think of guys that had that road, you got to respect them a lot more than guys that are just brought in and handed the title, which is essentially what happened to Slaughter. So no disrespect to Slaughter. He's awesome. He's a legend, and there's a lot of great things about him. But as far as him being deserved at the time, I think it was more of a matter of it just fitting the storyline. Vince McMahon needed a really hot heel to go against Hogan at WrestleMania. They had big plans for that show. They were supposed to sell out a 100,000-seat outdoor arena, and they ended up moving it indoors because the gimmick and the angle wasn't as good, I think, as Vince thought in his head. And looking back, it still wasn't one of my favorite things that they've ever done. So even though I love Sergeant Slaughter, I'm going to put him on the list of maybe some of the more undeserving world champions in history. Also, Yokozuna. I love Yoko, love his family, but think about how he won the belt the same way as Slaughter did. He comes in the company in late 92. They had immediate plans to put the belt on him, and he won it at WrestleMania 9 just a few months later, so he was WWE Champion just a few months after his debut. Hogan took it off of him that same night in that debacle, and then he ended up winning it back from Hogan at the King of the Ring and held the belt for like a year. So it was a long run for Yoko, and he got it rather quickly. Even though Yoko was awesome, for a big guy, he could move in that ring, he could work, and of course his family's legacy speaks for itself. So Yoko's a little bit more of a controversial one, but really, I think WWE just wanted a new big monster heel, somebody that was even heavier than Andre the Giant, and they saw Yoko as that guy, and they pushed him as the big monster sumo wrestling WWE champion, so whatever. But I think it happened rather quick for Yokozuna. With a guy like that, it seemed like they had plans to put the belt on him upon his debut, whether or not he was over or not. When you think of a guy like The Undertaker a few years before, when they brought him in, I don't think they had any intention of making him WWE champion. He got over on his own, and then they're like, holy shit, this gimmick is money. Let's have him beat Hogan for the belt. With Yoko, I think from the day he debuted, Vince saw him as a heel WWE champion. And maybe something a little bit more modern. How about Sheamus? He got his opportunity rather quickly, and I was never a really big Sheamus fan. I think I defended it at the time because fans were sick of John Cena. They wanted new guys. Sheamus and Jack Swagger and The Miz and guys like that were winning world titles around this time. But Sheamus was a guy that I just never saw anything too special in. I have no doubt he was a hard worker. Word is behind the scenes that Triple H really liked him. That might have been the answer for his push. And I thought he had a good look, and he wasn't bad in the ring. He was, maybe a cross between Triple H and Hercules or something like that as far as his work rate and stuff goes. And he could do some good moves, and he was definitely tough. So I'm not saying Sheamus was necessarily undeserving, but they put the belt on him kind of quickly and shockingly. And when you look at where he is today, he's not even anywhere close to any sort of an icon or anything like that, even though I love his tag team with Cesaro. When I look at all the other guys that won WWE titles, there's some honorable mentions. You could think of, maybe Psycho Sid. As of the recording of this commentary, I'm sure a lot of people would say Jinder Mahal. And there's a few other guys out there as well. But off the top of my head, those are a few of the names that I can think of. Stuart Boyd writes in, hey, good mic work. Really enjoy your work. Keep it up. My question is, what is your perfect number of commentators? I personally prefer the two-man team, like JR and King back in the day. And keeping with that theme, if you could pick a dream commentary team, who would it be? I think the amount of commentators a fan would prefer is just subjective. To me, I think it can work either way. I don't like 4-man teams, but I can live with a 3-man team, provided you have the right chemistry, provided it's the right 3 guys and they all mesh well together and they're entertaining and the fans enjoy it. I have no problem with a 3-man team. Same goes with a 2-man team. If you find 2 guys that are so good at doing it that you don't need a third, then I say keep it 2. JR and King was a great example of that back in the day. They were such a great commentary team back in the Attitude Era, just like Gorilla and Bobby were, just like Jesse and Gorilla were, just like Vince and Jesse were. And I don't think we've seen that chemistry since JR and King were on the air. As long as it works, I really don't care, provided they don't have more than 3. Just like in ECW with just Joey Styles, the thought of that is ludicrous. What, are you crazy? Just one announcer for the entire show does it all by himself? That will never work. But Joey Styles made it work, so one was perfectly acceptable. So it really doesn't matter at the end of the day how many commentators there are, as long as they do a good job of telling the story and showing passion and keeping the fans involved, you know, and making sure that the fans know what the hell's going on. That's just the job of an announcer, I guess. So, you know, to me, that's all I ask for. But in today's day and age, with the constant plugs and all the things the announcers constantly have to do and mention and remind the fans about and advertise and push, it's just annoying. So I don't think any commentating team can recreate any magic that took place in the 80s and 90s. But I don't know who my dream commentary team would be. I would probably take a guy of yesterday and a guy of more modern times. Maybe Jim Ross and Bobby Heenan, who actually did announce a couple of shows together briefly in the WWE, I believe WrestleMania 9 and King of the Ring, and then Bobby Heenan ended up leaving later that year. But I think Bobby Heenan and JR would be fun. I don't know if that would be necessarily my answer to your dream commentary team. I would have to think a little bit more on it. But off the top of my head, I might go with those two. Frank Canales from Los Angeles writes in with a couple. How did you react when Dr. D. David Schultz slapped John Stossel when he said he thought wrestling was fake to Schultz's face? I remember it on the news a lot. Now, as far as how I reacted, I don't remember being too freaked out about it because I was like 11 or whatever at the time. And, you know, in my mind, that reporter got what he deserved. But David Schultz was crazy, and he was always scary to me. I always, just as a kid, always didn't like him or something. He just wasn't one of my favorites. And, you know, that was a big story in wrestling when he pretty much assaulted that reporter. And it's happened a few times. We saw Vader get in all that trouble in Kuwait that time when he grabbed a hold of the interviewer or whatever. So this is stuff that happens from time to time. Dave Schultz had a temper, and back then in the 80s, you could just get away with a lot more. People seemed like they were getting beat up all the time, but if I had any memories or reaction of it, it's just how much news coverage it got. I do remember seeing a lot of that on the news at the time. Your other question was, which one of The Undertaker's WrestleMania entrances is my favorite? That's tough because a lot of the newer and more modern ones kind of all blend together. He's had some great ones, you know, 29 and 30 and 31 and 32. All those entrances are awesome, and they're such big productions now. It's hard to separate all of those. So I'm going to go old school. I'm going to say WrestleMania 9 is one of them. I liked the way he came out there with that crow or the bird on the perch or whatever. I thought that was kind of cool and eerie for the time, since The Undertaker at that time was only a 3-year-old gimmick. I also liked WrestleMania 13 because that was when he won the title, and he just had the old school entrance. He even wore his old school gear because in 97 at WrestleMania 13, he had kind of changed his character up. He had reemerged at the Survivor Series in like that Batman type look that he had, and he even had that like teardrop tattoo thing going on, and he was doing that throughout late 96, early 97. But for his Mania match with Sid, he came out in his original gear, you know, from like 1990 when he debuted. So I love his entrance for that reason. And then the following year at WrestleMania 14 with the Druids and the fire torches and the whole deal, that was when his entrances started getting really elaborate. So those would probably be my 3 favorite, WrestleMania 9, 13, and 14, just for sentimental reasons. I know some people might disagree with that, and that's your prerogative. Those are just some of my favorites. Next one comes from Goldie Lazzolo, Hi, good mic work. Love your YouTube channel. You are one of my favorite wrestling personalities on the site. Buy or sell, who had the better year in 2000, The Rock or Triple H? First of all, I want to give a quick shout out to a couple of my colleagues, of course, Solomonster and Aaron Rift from NoDQ.com. Every time I do a Q&A, I get several of these type of questions, buy or sells, and I also get a few PAIVs, please answer in videos, and both of those guys do those segments on their Q&As, and it's funny how sometimes I get those in my email box. I always get a kick out of that, and it happens every time, so shout out to those two guys. But as far as who had the better year, I'm going with The Rock. I mean, Triple H had an awesome year, don't get me wrong. He won the title back in 1999, and then he successfully defended it at WrestleMania and won it back in the Iron Man match, and he main evented SummerSlam, and he did some great things. But when you look at who had the better year, The Rock. The Rock was so fucking hot. White, crazy, balls out hot. I mean, arguably hotter than Stone Cold was in 98 or 99. The Rock hosted Saturday Night Live right before WrestleMania. Remember that? And Triple H made an appearance on that show along with Foley and The Big Show, but The Rock was the star. The Rock was the host. That performance on SNL is basically what kick-started his movie career. He got that gig in The Mummy, and next thing you know, there was a sequel, and he was the star of it, and then he was off and running, making one movie a fucking week for the next 15 years. So really, The Rock, when you look at it, even though both guys had awesome years that year, The Rock had the better one because he was the bigger star. Ben from Sydney, Australia writes in with a good one. Ben, I read this question about 3 weeks ago when you first sent it, and I have really been looking forward to answering it because I have so many memories of what you were asking. But basically, in a nutshell, you write in saying, "What's up, good mic work? Big fan of the channel. I've been watching for 2.5 years, but I've never asked a question for one of your Q&As, so hopefully this will get answered. I've realized while listening to you that you and I seem to be the same age, and we have a lot of the same memories of the WWF back in the 1980s. So I'm curious about what some of your favorite obscure or mid-card feuds in the 1980s would be. I know we all know about the big ones, Hulk and Andre, Savage and Steamboat, Savage and Honky Tonk, but what are some of your favorite mid-card feuds that you remember?" And you gave me a bunch of examples, half of which I completely agree with. And off the top of my head, as far as the 1980s go in the WWE, I jotted down a few of them after I read your question. And one of the ones I really liked is when they first brought in the one-man gang. And I don't know if you remember, this would have been 87 sometime. Maybe late 87, and after a squash match on Superstars, he beat the shit out of a bunch of referees, gave them all like front face lock suplexes, and I think one of the refs was even Jimmy Corderas, if I remember correctly, but they ran that angle where he just beat the shit out of a bunch of referees and got suspended or fined or something, and it never really led to anything, but I remember being shocked when I watched it because at that point, that's not something you really saw. You know, years later, we would see Stone Cold Steve Austin stun every single referee in the WWE multiple times, but back in the 80s, you didn't see referees get physically attacked like that very often, extremely rare. And especially in the WWE, that was so cartoony at the time with all the over-the-top characters. So that sort of violence on referees was not seen back then. And I just remember, you know, being a young kid, being kind of shocked by that. I also like what they did with Superstar Billy Graham when he made that brief comeback. And I guess when he tried to make a comeback into the ring after a hip replacement surgery, he was just not in very good shape. The steroid abuse and everything had taken its toll on his body, and he wasn't very good in the ring. So shortly after his return to the ring in like 87, he was going to be on the shelf with hip surgery or whatever, and they decided to make him the manager for Don Morocco, who was going to turn babyface, and they actually called him The Rock. Don Morocco was one of only 2 or 3 people to ever use the Rock nickname, and it's funny when you go back and watch matches from when Morocco was a babyface, to hear Gorilla Monsoon or Jesse Ventura refer to him as The Rock is just eerie if you close your eyes. It's just a very strange feeling. But I found myself really enjoying that angle as a young kid. I remember Morocco started wearing the tie-dye tank tops to the ring and came out to Jesus Christ Superstar music or whatever, and I just liked that combination of Superstar and Morocco. I thought they were a good 1-2 punch. I thought Superstar Graham was a good mentor for him, and Morocco was already very successful, former Intercontinental Champion, had multiple matches with world champions throughout his career up till that point in the WWE, probably in the best shape of his life at this point as well. And he would only be in the WWE a short time after his babyface turn. Once he went babyface and aligned himself with Superstar Graham, he was out of the WWE, I think, by before 1989. But one of the angles that I remember the most is how they got together. They got together with superstar Billy Graham having a match. I think it was either against Greg Valentine or the One Man Gang. I forgot who, but basically this was probably their way of writing superstar Billy Graham off of TV, because during this match he would be double teamed and the gang would repeatedly splash superstar Billy Graham on his bad hip. And you had Bruno doing commentary back then, and I just remember hearing his voice saying, right on that hip, right on that bad hip, in that Bruno voice. And I remember being freaked out, like, oh my God, they're killing poor superstar Billy Graham. Don Morocco finally runs out, apparently to make the save. And they got together after that because The Rock kind of saved superstar Graham. But after that, he would have hip surgery, I believe, and I don't think he would wrestle again, to the best of my knowledge. And Morocco would replace superstar Billy Graham in the first ever Survivor Series. Billy Graham was supposed to be on Hulk Hogan's team, and he was replaced by Morocco after that whole angle went down on TV. So I really enjoyed that feud, and it's just one that I have a lot of memories of. Also, Brutus Beefcake and Outlaw Ron Bass, the angle on TV that they did that led to Brutus being kicked off SummerSlam. He was supposed to have an Intercontinental title match with the Honky Tonk Man at the first ever SummerSlam. He was sidelined by Ron Bass, who got revenge on Brutus for cutting up Miss Betsy with his hedge clippers. The next week, Bass jumps Brutus from behind in the middle of a match and takes the spurs off of his boots and starts raking Brutus's forehead, and he was bleeding. And I remember on TV they had the big red X, the big censored sign. And again, back then, you know, unless you're watching Four Horsemen shit in the NWA, you didn't really see a whole lot of blood. You got it down south more often than not, but in the WWE around that time, it was something that was pretty rare. And if you ever did see it, you would see it in the main event in a cage match or something like that of a big show. It's not something that would just happen in the middle of a television program during a squash match. So for Beefcake to get all cut up like that was pretty gnarly, and it knocked him out of the SummerSlam match. And this feud would eventually be blown off. I think in a hair match, Brutus would eventually shave Outlaw Ron Bass's head after a match that I believe came on TV just on their Saturday show, or maybe Saturday night's main event. I can't remember how that was blown off. But the whole Brutus Bass thing always brings back a ton of memories for me. I loved when the Islanders turned heel on the Can-Ams. They were having this like babyface match on TV, and then Bobby Heenan comes out to the ring to join up with the Islanders and reveal that the Islanders are now heel and Bobby Heenan is their manager, and they beat the shit out of the Can-Am Connection. Shortly after that, Tom Zink would leave and go to WCW and be replaced by Tito Santana, and they would form Strikeforce and eventually beat the Harts for the tag team titles. But I remember the TV show when the Islanders turned heel because I watched it. I was right there on my couch on a Saturday watching that whole thing happen, and I remember exactly where I was. I remember the pants that I was wearing when that happened. I was just a kid, and I loved it. Also, when the Islanders kidnapped Matilda, that's another episode that I remember. And they were going to have a match shortly after their heel turn with the Bulldogs. For some reason, they decide to take Matilda after they attack the Bulldogs, grab her, and just run off with her. The Islanders and Heenan just straight up kidnap this dog. The Bulldogs are going apeshit. They're chasing the Islanders out of the arena. I remember watching Dynamite like fall all over himself, trying to look around, trying to find Matilda. I mean, they were going crazy about this dog, and that would lead to their WrestleMania 4 match. It was like a 6-man when Bobby Heenan wore the protective suit to keep him protected from the vicious, rabid Matilda. Pretty funny stuff there, but that's always an angle and a little storyline and feud that I always got a kick out of. I loved all the stuff they did with Harley Race and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. That was a lot of fun. Bundy and Hogan, when they got back into it in '88, of course they main evented WrestleMania 2 a couple of years prior to that, but when they were building for Hulk and Andre, that big primetime main event special that they had with Hogan and Andre on NBC that drew that huge number, they kind of set this up by having Bundy and Hogan feud again in late 1987. And they would work a couple of Saturday night's main events together. And the first one, Bundy actually won. He won via countout. I remember watching this too. I have it on tape. I still have this same original VHS tape that I recorded this thing off of TV 30 fucking years ago. I have the same exact tape. But I remember staying up late and watching that Bundy-Hogan match, and they're fighting on the outside of the ring. Bundy gets back in the ring, and as Hogan tries to get in as well, Bobby Heenan grabs him by the leg, and he gets counted out. And that led to a rematch. Like a few weeks later, I think that would close out 1987. This was either super late 1987 or very early 1988. It was either late December or early January, but it was a rematch because Bundy now, since he has a victory over Hulk Hogan, he wants a title shot, and Andre the Giant was going to be in King Kong Bundy's corner. So the deck is stacked huge against Hogan. Part of me thought he might actually drop the belt. I mean, he's got to go in against a former WrestleMania main event opponent, and he's got the eighth wonder of the world on the outside of the ring to contend with, but eventually he beats Bundy, and during his celebration, when he's posing and everything, Andre the Giant hits the ring, comes in from behind, attacks Hogan with the headbutts, and just starts choking him out. And the locker room empties. I remember the Bulldogs were the first ones to hit the ring, and they're attacking Andre, and he just shakes them both off and tosses them both right over the top rope. And a whole bunch of guys come out, and they're trying to pry Andre off of Hulk Hogan. And the whole time, he's just choking Hogan's neck. And Hogan is completely unconscious. Finally, he lets him go, and Hogan is just like dead on the canvas. It was an awesome angle. I remember when Bam Bam came in around the same time, Bam Bam Bigelow, and it was assumed that he was going to come in as a heel because back then the only managers you had, aside from Miss Elizabeth, were heel managers. They all wanted to manage this new guy, and it was like this 5-week-long thing where it was like this battle for Bam Bam. That's what they called it, the battle for Bam Bam. Even Luscious Johnny was one of the managers up for this gig with Bam Bam. Eventually, they start ruling them out one at a time, Jimmy Hart, Bobby Heenan, Mr. Fuji, and it turns out at the end, like, Slick thinks he's going to get Bam Bam. And Nikolai Volkov is there, and they're doing an interview to welcome Bam Bam onto the team, and then he reveals that he's actually a babyface and attacks Nikolai Volkov and announces that his new manager is Oliver Humperdinck, and they brought him in, and he was a babyface. So all this time, all the vignettes that they ran for Bam Bam, they were making it seem like he was going to be a heel, and he turned babyface on his first night in the company. That's something that I don't think we've ever seen since. And the only other one that I have written down is when Rugged Ronnie Garvin became a referee. He was feuding with Greg the Hammer Valentine. Garvin had huge success in the NWA, former NWA champion, but he was not doing anything in the WWE of any importance. It was just a good gig for him. He was probably getting a nice payday, and he was a good hand to have on the roster, but they never did a whole lot with Ronnie Garvin, and he wasn't there very long, but he did have a small feud with Greg the Hammer Valentine, and they had a couple of submission matches. I want to say one of the submission matches was at the Royal Rumble, and Ronnie Garvin tapped out Greg Valentine, like with the sharpshooter. And Greg Valentine was wearing the shin guard at the time. The whole thing became like a battle of submissions between Valentine's figure four and Ronnie Garvin's sharpshooter. They had the submission match, which Ronnie Garvin won. And then a couple of weeks later on TV, they had another match, and the loser apparently had to retire. It was either the loser had to retire, or if Valentine won, Garvin had to retire. It might have been a one-sided stipulation, I don't remember. But Valentine did win that match, and Ronnie Garvin had to retire. And then he became a referee. And I still to this day don't know why. He might have been injured. Maybe he had to get some minor surgery done, and they just needed him off TV, or out of the ring at least, for a little while. And they put him in the referee role to keep him busy with his deal with Valentine. I don't even remember the circumstances behind that, but I always remember that little miniature feud between the two and being relatively entertained by it. So, back then, my memories are so full of feuds back in the 1980s. There's hardly any of them that I didn't like. I mean, some of those feuds that I just mentioned, some of it was stupid. But for me, in my memories, the memories that I have, they were some of my favorites because I just remember them so vividly. And I really enjoyed the 1980s and pretty much everything the WWE was doing back then. Back when you're young and back when you're a kid, wrestling is so much easier to enjoy. So now that we're approaching the 2-hour mark in this Q&A, I think I'll just answer like 2 or 3 more and go ahead and get out of here. Next one is from Scott Toda. Hi, good mic work. My question is, what are your thoughts on the rumor that WWE was considering putting the WWE Championship on Chyna back at SummerSlam 1999? And if they did, who would you have liked to see her feud with and drop the belt to? And your answer to that was Triple H. Well, that makes the most sense. I remember hearing that they talked about putting the title on Chyna. If they did, I think it would have been a really short title run. I'm talking maybe a day, a week, or a month at the most. WWE probably just wanted to get some attention by putting the WWE title on a female for the first time ever. And if there was ever one female that would have been credible enough to win a men's title, Chyna would have been it. And she, of course, would win the Intercontinental title a couple of months later. But if they would have put the world title on her, I think it would have just been for shock value. I think she would have immediately dropped it to Triple H the next night on Raw, much like Mankind did. Or maybe the week after, or maybe the next pay-per-view if they actually wanted to stretch this out and actually have a pay-per-view match. But I don't know if Chyna was all that good in the ring, even with Triple H carrying her, to support the main event of a pay-per-view during that time period in the WWE. So I think it would have been fine if they put the WWE title on Chyna back then. I wouldn't have freaked out too bad. We saw a lot of crazy shit back then, and WWE was really a different animal back then. They were still locked in the Monday Night Wars, even though they had taken over by that point. So if they would have put the belt on Chyna, I would have been fine with it. And yeah, I agree with you. They probably would have had her feud with Triple H, put her in there with somebody that they know will protect her because they were dating at the time. And Triple H would have taken good care of her. He would have made her look good and would have made the match as best as possible. And she would have okay matches later on with Chris Jericho and stuff, but I think Triple H would have been a very good opponent for her as she won the belt. But at the same time, if you remember, Triple H had not won his first world title yet. So that means Chyna, that means his girlfriend would have won the world title before he did, after all of the dues he paid and everything he had been through. I don't know how he would have felt about that. And if he would have defeated Chyna for the belt, that means he won his first WWE title by defeating a woman. So I don't know if any of that would have worked at that time, at SummerSlam 99. Maybe a couple of months later, they could have done it after Triple H was already champion. Maybe Chyna would have beat him in some sort of a fluke match and won the title from him instead of beating Steve or Mick Foley for it. And then Triple H could turn around and beat her. So maybe September, October of 99, around the time when she won the Intercontinental title, if they would have put the world title on her instead, I think that would have made more sense than SummerSlam. Wow, this is kind of strange that this is happening right at the end of this commentary. Underneath Scott's question, I have another question from somebody with the same last name. That's bizarre. This one is from Alexis Toda. I don't know if the two of you are related, or maybe this is the same account asking multiple questions. I don't know. But I've had this one written down for a long time, and I'm just now realizing that this last name matches the question I just did. But anyway, Alexis asks, what is your favorite time period during Bret the Hitman Hart's legacy? You knew we weren't going to get out of this Q&A without at least a couple of Bret Hart questions. I know I answered one way back earlier at the beginning, and I figured I would close out the Q&A with another one here. Much like my top 5 favorite Bret Hart matches question earlier on, this is really tough to narrow down, but if I had to pick, I would probably actually pick his Intercontinental title days. I love the fact that Bret Hart is a 5-time WWE champion. I loved his run in 93. I loved his run in 1994 and his feud with Owen. But when I look at when I really became a huge fan of Bret Hart, that really started during his Intercontinental title years. I was a big fan during the Hart Foundation years too. His first and second run with Jim Neidhart with the tag team titles were great. I fell in love with Bret Hart during that time, but I was really into him when he branched off and became a successful singles star and beat Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental title at SummerSlam 91. So I would probably say that year between SummerSlam 91 and SummerSlam 92, when he won the title from Perfect and then he dropped it to the Mountie, won it back from Roddy Piper in a great match at WrestleMania, and then dropped it to Davey Boy at SummerSlam, and then won the world title like a month after that. So that time period right there is when I have the fondest memories of Bret Hart. And you could even stretch that out another year because I enjoyed his first run as WWE Champion, even when he lost the title at WrestleMania in that bullshit finish with Yokozuna and Hulk Hogan being involved in that. He still had a really, really good and fun run. I loved the King of the Ring, his performance at the first ever King of the Ring in 93, the way he won that tournament, defeating Scott Hall, defeating Mr. Perfect in one of my favorite matches ever. I might even like that King of the Ring 93 match between him and Perfect as much, if not more so, than their SummerSlam match. And then, of course, he goes on to have a legendary feud with Jerry Lawler and eventually winning the belt back at WrestleMania 10 in 1994. But yeah, if I had to pick, it would be 91 through like 92 would definitely be my favorite era of the Hitman. And finally, let's wrap up the Q&A with one final question from Matt from Nova Scotia, which is kind of fitting since I just mentioned the King of the Ring 1993 show. And your question is, what are my thoughts on the past King of the Rings, and why doesn't the WWE reinstate this pay-per-view and at least do it on a WWE Network special or something like that? I totally agree. I cannot believe that they have never brought back the King of the Ring. I mean, they have a couple of times, even in recent memory when William Regal won it. But every time they brought this concept back, it sucked. They've always done it on Raw, or it was stretched out over a long period of time. I want to see it go old school. I want to see a one-night tournament, an 8-man tournament, 3 rounds, all taking place inside of the same show. And now with the WWE Network, it seems like this is a no-brainer. Why won't the WWE bring back this concept for one night only, once a year, and have competitors from both shows, 4 Raw guys and 4 SmackDown guys, and you can have qualifying matches all over those shows for weeks on TV leading up to the big tournament, and it could just be a network special, or it can be a regular pay-per-view, which pretty much are network specials at this point. I think it's ridiculous. I've mentioned this a few times before. It amazes me how the WWE cannot seem to figure out how to do a King of the Ring. Every time they've tried to bring it back, it's been a complete flop or failure, you know, with King Booker winning it and William Regal and whatever else they've done in recent memory with the King of the Ring. It's just sucked. So yeah, bringing it back for a one-night-only tournament on the WWE Network as a co-branded pay-per-view, I think would be great. And I think some of the reasons WWE might be hesitant on this is because it limits the amount of people you can have on the pay-per-view. I mean, you're only going to have 8 guys involved in the tournament with maybe a couple of filler matches in between some of the rounds. But other than that, you're not going to have a whole lot of talent involved. So maybe they stretched it into a 16-man tournament or something like that. But I think it's silly that WWE has not at least tried something like this. And if they brought this pay-per-view back, not as a network special, but as an actual pay-per-view, they could do it in June. Get rid of Great Balls of Fire. Get rid of Battleground. Get rid of one of these stupid pay-per-views and do a King of the Ring. I mean, King of the Ring has a lot of history. You had Owen winning this thing. You had Bret as a former King of the Ring winner. Stone Cold Steve Austin became the star that he was in large part due to his King of the Ring speech when he won it. When they try to bring back a watered-down version on Monday Night Raw, it doesn't have the same magic. So yeah, I think the fact that these guys have their own network makes it pretty easy to do a King of the Ring tournament if they want to, but for some reason they don't, and I have no idea why. So that'll wrap it up for this latest Q&A. Thank you to everybody for sticking around for the last 2 hours and listening to me run my mouth. It was a lot of fun. And hopefully I will not go another 6 months before I give you another Q&A again. And like I mentioned earlier on in the video, I might do a live Q&A next time around. I don't know. So maybe we'll change things up next time around. I'll see what the response is on that. And I'll get back to you on my plans for future Q&As. Until then, keep sending your questions to goodmikework@gmail.com. I apologize again to anybody that did not get their question answered. I still have them all saved so I can get to them next time around. But generally, these commentaries, I can't have them go more than 2 hours because I need to get this thing uploaded to you. I'm already late, and I don't want you guys to kill me. So I appreciate the support and you guys taking the time to listen to this, and hopefully I will be up here sooner rather than later with another Q&A. I will talk to you guys very soon. Take care of yourselves. Until next time. Peace.